On our wedding anniversary, my wife turned to me in front of everyone, looked me straight in the eyes, and said, "I wish you had never been in my life." At that moment, I felt something break inside me. The next day, I didn't pretend nothing had happened. I sold the house, closed all the bank accounts, left everything behind without a trace, and quietly disappeared. Look, I've been through some pretty embarrassing situations in my life. There was that time in college when I accidentally called my professor mom during a thesis defense. There was the incident at my cousin's wedding where I caught the bouquet despite being a fully grown married man who wasn't even trying. But nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for the atomic bomb of humiliation that Clara dropped on me at our 10th wedding anniversary dinner. You know what's worse than being dumped? Being dumped publicly, with witnesses, at an event you paid for, surrounded by people who are going to gossip about this for the next decade. It's like getting fired via company-wide email, except the company is your entire social circle and the severance package is just crippling embarrassment. So there we were at the Royal Moscow Grand Hotel, and let me tell you, this place was the kind of fancy that makes you nervous about touching anything. Crystal chandeliers that probably cost more than my first car hung from ceilings so high you'd need a stepladder just to change a light bulb. The champagne was flowing like we'd struck liquid gold, which, given the prices they were charging, we might as well have. Everyone was dressed to the nines, dripping in designer labels and expensive cologne that smelled like, "I have more money than common sense." The women looked like they'd walked straight off a Paris runway, and the men looked like they owned the runway, the models, and probably the entire fashion district. My wife, Clara Ivanova, was standing there in this red silk dress that could stop traffic in 3 countries, looking like she'd been photoshopped by God himself. Her dark hair was swept up in some complicated style that probably required an engineering degree to achieve, and her makeup was so flawless she could have been a living Instagram filter. Me? I looked like a guy who thought showing up in a decent suit and remembering to trim his nose hair was the height of sophistication. I was proud of myself for matching my socks, honestly. The evening had been going smoothly enough, if you ignore the fact that Clara had barely looked at me all night and her mother, Veronica, kept shooting me these little smirks that made me feel like I was the punchline to a joke I hadn't heard yet. People were mingling, laughing at things that weren't funny because that's what you do at fancy parties when you're trying to impress people you secretly can't stand. The catering staff glided around like well-dressed ghosts, offering tiny portions of food that tasted amazing but left you hungrier than when you started. I'd already made my toast earlier in the evening, something safe and romantic about how Clara was my rock, my inspiration, blah blah blah, all the greatest hits you're supposed to say when you're trying to convince everyone your marriage is solid. People had clapped politely, someone had said, "Ah," and I'd felt pretty good about myself. Mission accomplished, right? Wrong. So incredibly, devastatingly wrong. When Clara stood up and grabbed the microphone, I figured she was going to return the favor with something equally sweet. Maybe she'd talk about our journey together, our struggles and triumphs, how we built this life brick by brick. Maybe she'd mention that trip we took to Italy where I got food poisoning, but still insisted on seeing the Colosseum, because I'm a trooper like that. I was actually smiling, looking around at our guests with this dopey expression of contentment, probably looking like an idiot who didn't know he was about to get emotionally murdered in front of everyone he'd ever met. The room quieted down, everyone turning their attention to Clara, their faces expectant and warm. This was supposed to be the heartwarming moment where she professed her love and everyone got a little teary-eyed. Instead, she smiled at me, and I swear to God, it was the smile of a Bond villain who'd just activated their doomsday device. It was the smile of someone who'd been planning this moment for months, maybe years, and was finally getting to execute their masterpiece of destruction. "To my dear husband," she said, her voice clear and steady, projecting across the entire ballroom like she was accepting an Oscar for best performance in crushing someone's soul. "I wish you had never been in my life." The silence that followed was so profound you could have heard a pin drop from the bathroom 3 floors up. Someone gasped, loud enough that it echoed. A fork clattered onto a plate somewhere to my left, the sound like a gunshot in the frozen moment. A woman in the back made this little squeaking noise like a mouse that had just witnessed a murder. My brain, bless its stupid optimistic heart, refused to process what had just happened for a solid 5 seconds. It was like my neurons were saying, Nope, we didn't hear that. Let's rewind and try again. But there was no rewinding. Clara was still standing there with that smile, that awful, beautiful, terrible smile, and everyone was staring at me like I'd just been diagnosed with a terminal case of public humiliation. My coping mechanism for emotional devastation, as it turns out, is apparently to become a stand-up comedian nobody asked for. I laughed, this weird, awkward sound that came out more like a bark than actual laughter, and said, "Oh, so no dessert then?" A few people made these uncomfortable chuckling noises, the kind of laugh you give when someone makes a joke at a funeral and you're not sure if it's appropriate to find it funny. Clara didn't laugh. She just kept staring at me with those ice-cold eyes, like she was watching a documentary about an extinct species and feeling absolutely nothing. Her mother, Veronica, who'd always treated me like I was something she'd scraped off her Louboutins, looked positively delighted. She was practically glowing with schadenfreude, her eyes sparkling like it was Christmas morning and I was the worst present anyone had ever received. My brother-in-law, Dmitri, raised his glass slightly and leaned over to whisper, "Rough night, huh?" "Yeah, thanks for that brilliant observation, Dmitri. Really appreciate the commentary from the peanut gallery during my public execution. I wanted to disappear. I wanted the floor to open up and swallow me whole, to transport me to another dimension where this hadn't just happened, where I was still the happy idiot who thought his marriage was solid. But the floor stayed stubbornly solid beneath my feet, and all those faces kept staring, some with pity, some with shock, and some, like Veronica, with barely concealed glee. Clara handed the microphone back to the MC, smoothed down her dress with this casual gesture like she'd just commented on the weather rather than nuked our entire relationship, and walked off the stage. She didn't look back. Not once. And somehow, that hurt more than the words themselves. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 30 seconds, trying to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do next. Do I chase after her? Do I make another joke? Do I start crying right here in front of Moscow's elite and give them an even better story to tell at their next cocktail party? In the end, I did what any rational person would do in my situation. I grabbed my champagne glass, downed it in one gulp, and decided that tomorrow I'd figure out what to do with the rest of my suddenly very different life. Tonight, I was just going to stand here and marinate in the spectacular disaster that my 10th wedding anniversary had become. The penthouse felt different when I got back that night. It wasn't just cold, though the Moscow winter was doing its best impression of the Arctic tundra outside our floor-to-ceiling windows. No, this was a different kind of cold, the kind that seeps into your bones and makes you realize that expensive heating systems can't do anything about the ice forming in your chest. The city lights twinkled below like a million little witnesses to my humiliation, each one probably occupied by someone who'd been at that dinner, already texting their friends about the spectacular public destruction of my marriage. I could practically hear the WhatsApp groups lighting up across Moscow. "OMG, did you see what Clara did to her husband?" Followed by a string of shocked face emojis and skull emojis and whatever other digital sympathy people offer when they're secretly thrilled they're not you. I stood in the doorway for a solid minute, just staring into our home, or what used to feel like our home. Now it looked like a museum exhibit titled The Before Times. What this idiot thought his life was. Everything was exactly where we'd left it this morning when we'd gotten ready for the anniversary dinner. Clara's coffee cup was still on the marble counter, lipstick stain on the rim like a little signature of normalcy. The throw pillows on the couch were arranged in that specific way she liked, the magazines on the coffee table fanned out at precise angles. It all looked so perfectly domestic, so dishonestly peaceful. I half expected a voiceover to start narrating my life like I was in some tragic Russian novel, which, let's be honest, I basically was at this point. All I needed was some snow and a philosophical crisis, and boom, I could be in a Dostoevsky adaptation. Clara didn't come home that night. I kept checking my phone like some pathetic teenager waiting for their crush to text back, watching the screen light up with notifications that were definitely not from my wife. My mom called, bless her heart, probably because someone had already informed her that her son had been verbally demolished in front of half of Moscow's social elite. I didn't answer. What was I going to say? Hey, Mom. Yeah, turns out my marriage was a lie, and I'm an idiot. How was your Tuesday? I got a text from my buddy Victor asking if I was okay, which I ignored because the answer was obviously no, and I wasn't in the mood to state the obvious. There were a few missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize, probably journalists or gossipy acquaintances looking for the inside scoop, like I was going to give interviews about my own destruction. I checked the fridge because that's what you do when your life falls apart. You look for comfort in refrigerated goods. Spoiler alert, we had nothing. Some fancy cheese that probably cost more than a car payment, half a bottle of white wine that Clara liked and I tolerated, and a container of leftover something that I couldn't identify and honestly didn't want to. Perfect. My wife had just publicly wished I'd never existed, and I didn't even have proper breakup ice cream to eat my feelings with. I grabbed the wine bottle, didn't bother with a glass because I was well past the point of pretending I had any dignity left, and went to sit on the couch. Our couch. The one we'd picked out together 3 years ago after spending an entire Saturday arguing about whether gray or beige was more timeless. We'd gone with gray. Clara had one, like she always did. Looking at it now, I couldn't remember why I'd cared so much about beige. The apartment was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat, which was annoying because I'd rather not be reminded that my body was continuing to function despite the fact that my entire world had just imploded. I lay down on that expensive gray couch, staring up at the ceiling that we'd had repainted last spring in something called Whisper White, which apparently was different from regular white in ways that cost an extra 3,000 rubles. The ceiling stared back at me, blank and unhelpful, offering no answers to the questions spinning through my head like a demented carousel. Why? How long had she been planning this? Was this some elaborate prank that I was too stupid to understand? Maybe hidden cameras were going to pop out and she'd laugh and say gotcha. And we'd all have a good laugh about the time she pretended to nuke our marriage for entertainment purposes. But the cameras never appeared, and Clara never came home, and I was left lying there like some tragic protagonist in a movie nobody wanted to watch. Her words kept replaying in my head on an endless loop, like the world's worst song that you can't get out of your brain no matter how hard you try. I wish you had never been in my life. Not, I want a divorce. Not, I'm unhappy. Not even, I've met someone else. Just a complete erasure of our entire decade together, reduced to a single wish that I'd never existed in her world at all. It was almost impressive in its cruelty, like she'd workshopped different options and decided that total negation was the most effective knife to twist. I couldn't help but wonder if she'd practiced that line in the mirror, testing different deliveries until she found the one that would cause maximum damage. I laughed then, lying there in the dark with an empty wine bottle on my chest, and it came out bitter and sharp like broken glass. You and me both, sweetheart, I said to the empty apartment, to the designer furniture and the expensive art on the walls and the life we'd built that apparently meant nothing. My voice echoed slightly in the silence, and even I could hear how pathetic I sounded, talking to myself like some unhinged hermit who'd forgotten how human interaction worked. But there was nobody else to talk to, and the alternative was sitting in complete silence with my thoughts, which seemed significantly worse. I must have fallen asleep at some point because I woke up with my neck at an angle that would require a chiropractor and possibly divine intervention to fix. The early morning light was filtering through the windows, gray and cold, matching my mood perfectly. For about 3 beautiful seconds, I didn't remember what had happened. Then it all came rushing back like a highlight reel of my worst moments, and I groaned loud enough to disturb the neighbors. My phone showed 17 missed calls and 43 text messages, which seemed like a lot until I realized that most of them were probably from people I hadn't talked to in years who suddenly remembered I existed now that I was a walking disaster. Nothing from Clara, though. Not a single word. No apology, no explanation, no sorry I publicly destroyed you last night, my bad. Just silence. I dragged myself off the couch and caught a glimpse of myself in the hallway mirror. I looked like I'd been hit by a truck driven by disappointment and fueled by betrayal. My hair was sticking up in directions that defied physics, my suit was wrinkled beyond recognition, and my eyes had this hollow quality that suggested I'd seen things no man should see. Which, fair, I kind of had. I looked like my own before picture in one of those transformation stories, except there was no after picture yet. Just more, before stretching out indefinitely into a future I hadn't planned for and didn't want. Something shifted in me then, standing there looking at my own wrecked reflection. It wasn't quite anger yet, and it wasn't really sadness anymore either. It was something colder, calmer, more dangerous. It was the feeling you get when you realize that the person you thought you knew never actually existed, and the life you thought you had was just a performance you'd been too blind to see through. It was clarity, sharp and painful and absolutely certain. By the time the sun had fully risen over Moscow, painting everything in shades of gold that felt insulting given my circumstances, my heartbreak had transformed into something else entirely. The kind of calm that only comes before people do something dramatic. The kind of calm that meant tomorrow was going to look very different from yesterday. I walked to the window and looked out at the city that had witnessed my humiliation, and I made a decision. If Clara wanted me out of her life, fine. I'd grant her wish. But I'd do it on my terms, in my way, and when I was done, she'd realize that some wishes come with consequences you didn't see coming. But first, I needed coffee and a plan, probably in that order. First thing in the morning, after I'd showered away the physical evidence of my emotional breakdown and put on a fresh suit, because even in crisis I apparently still cared about looking presentable, I called our lawyer. Mikhail Petrov had been handling our affairs for the past 6 years, ever since we'd bought the penthouse and needed someone to navigate the nightmare of Russian property law. He was one of those guys who looked like he'd been born in a gray suit, emerged from the womb already wearing reading glasses and carrying a briefcase full of disappointment. His office was downtown, in one of those buildings that screamed, "We charge by the minute and you can't afford us." All marble floors and original art that probably cost more than most people's kidneys on the black market. I didn't make an appointment because honestly, appointments felt like something people with stable lives did, and I was currently operating in crisis mode where normal rules didn't apply. I just showed up at 9 in the morning, probably looking like a man who'd spent the night wrestling with existential dread and losing, and told his assistant that I needed to see Mikhail immediately. She took one look at my face and must have decided that whatever was happening was above her pay grade, because she ushered me right in without the usual, "Let me check his schedule" dance. Mikhail was sitting behind his enormous desk that was probably made from the dreams of defeated clients, looking over some documents with that expression lawyers get when they're reading something that's going to cost someone a lot of money. He glanced up when I walked in, and I watched his professional mask slip for just a second as he registered my appearance. I must have looked worse than I thought. "Good morning," he said carefully, like he was talking to someone who might be armed or emotionally unstable, which, fair assessment. "This is unexpected. Is everything all right?" What a question. Was everything all right? "Oh sure, Mikhail, everything's peachy. My wife just publicly wished me out of existence in front of everyone we know, but other than that, living the dream." I sat down in one of his leather chairs that probably cost more than my first car and got straight to the point because I didn't have time for pleasantries or small talk or pretending that this was a social visit. "Mikhail," I said, and my voice sounded steadier than I felt, which was a minor miracle. "I want to sell everything." He blinked at me, which was probably the most emotion I'd ever seen from him. Lawyers like Mikhail didn't do surprise very often. They'd trained themselves out of human reaction somewhere during law school, but I'd apparently managed to crack through his professional exterior. He set down his pen with deliberate care, folded his hands on the desk like he was about to deliver bad news to a terminal patient, and said, "Everything, sir? Could you be more specific?" "Everything," I repeated, because apparently he needed me to spell it out. "The penthouse, both cars, the vacation house in Sochi that we used exactly twice in 3 years, that boat Clara insisted we needed even though neither of us can sail, the art collection, the furniture, that ridiculous espresso machine that cost more than a motorcycle. All of it. I want it sold, liquidated, turned into cash that I can actually do something with." I was on a roll now, the words coming faster as the plan solidified in my head. "Oh, and that overpriced blender she bought from some Italian designer that we never used because it was too beautiful to actually blend things with. Sell that too. Sell everything that isn't nailed down. And if it is nailed down, get a crowbar." Mikhail's expression had progressed from surprise to concerned, like he was watching someone have a breakdown in real time and trying to figure out if he should call security or a psychiatrist. "Sir," he said slowly, using that tone people use when they're trying to talk someone off a ledge, "are you sure about this? That's your entire life. Your assets, your home, your investments. You've spent years building this portfolio. He gestured vaguely at the folder on his desk that probably contained details about every expensive decision Clara and I had made over the past decade. If this is about a marital dispute, perhaps we should discuss more measured approaches. Mediation, counseling, a temporary separation. It's not a dispute, Mikhail, I interrupted, and I couldn't help but laugh because calling what happened at that dinner a dispute was like calling the Titanic a boat accident. A dispute is when you disagree about where to go for dinner. This is something else entirely. And yes, I'm absolutely sure. In fact, I've never been more sure of anything in my life, which is saying something because I once convinced myself that investing in a friend's cryptocurrency venture was a good idea. That had lost me about 50,000 rubles before I'd learned my lesson about trusting people who used the word blockchain more than 3 times in a sentence. He studied me for a long moment, probably running through his mental database of divorce cases and trying to figure out where mine fell on the scale of amicable split to complete catastrophe. Eventually, he sighed, pulled out a fresh legal pad, and clicked his pen with the resignation of someone who knew they were about to have a very long day. All right, he said, let's start with the property. The penthouse is in both your names, correct? And just like that, we were off to the races. For the next 3 hours, Mikhail walked me through the process of dismantling a life. We discussed market values and tax implications and the best strategies for liquidating assets quickly without losing too much money in the process. Apparently, when you're in a hurry to sell everything you own, people sense desperation like sharks sense blood, and they'll lowball you accordingly. But I didn't care. I wasn't doing this for maximum profit. I was doing it for maximum freedom. By noon, I'd signed more papers than I thought existed in the world. My hand was cramping from all the signatures, and I developed a newfound respect for people whose job involved paperwork because this was exhausting. Each signature felt like closing a door on the past, sealing off another piece of the life I'd thought I had. Sign here to sell the penthouse where we'd hosted dinner parties and argued about throw pillows. Sign here to liquidate the investment account we'd opened when we'd still believed in joint futures. Sign here to dissolve the vacation property where we'd spent exactly 4 days before realizing that Sochi in winter was basically just expensive misery with a beach view. What about the joint accounts? Mikhail asked, flipping through his notes. Right, the joint accounts. The ones where our money mingled together like our lives were actually intertwined. Shut them down, I said. Transfer my half to my personal account. Actually, no, not my personal account. I'd had an idea percolating in the back of my mind, something I'd set up years ago on the advice of a paranoid business partner who'd insisted that everyone should have a backup plan. I have an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. I set it up 5 years ago and honestly forgot about it until right now. Transfer everything there. Mikhail's eyebrows climbed toward his hairline, which was the most animated I'd ever seen him. You have an offshore account? He sounded almost impressed, like I'd just revealed I was secretly a spy or an international man of mystery instead of just a guy who'd listened to one too many podcasts about financial security. Why? I shrugged. Paranoia, mostly. My business partner, Alexei, convinced me it was smart to have funds somewhere that couldn't be easily accessed or frozen in case of emergencies. He was always going on about protecting assets and having contingency plans. At the time, I thought he was being ridiculous. Now I'm thinking maybe Alexei was a genius and I should have listened to more of his conspiracy theories. Well, Mikhail said, making a note. In this case, his paranoia is serving you well. I'll have the transfers initiated by end of business today. He looked up at me, and for the first time since I'd known him, there was something almost human in his expression. Not quite sympathy, but maybe understanding. What about personal belongings? Clothes, items of sentimental value. I'd already thought about that. Last night, in between staring at the ceiling and contemplating the meaninglessness of existence, I'd mentally cataloged what actually mattered to me. Turns out, not much. 1 suitcase, I told him. I'm packing 1 suitcase. Some jeans, sneakers, practical stuff. My grandfather's watch, the one he gave me before he died. And a photo of my dog, Max, from when I was a kid. Max had been a golden retriever with the IQ of a brick and the loyalty of a saint. He'd loved me unconditionally for 12 years without ever questioning whether I deserved it or wondering if he could do better. That dog had shown me more genuine affection than my wife of 10 years. Funny how that worked out. That's it. Mikhail asked. That's it, I confirmed. Everything else is just stuff. Expensive stuff? Sure, but it's not mine anymore. It belongs to a life I'm not living. He nodded slowly and made another note. And where will you go? That was the million-ruble question, wasn't it? Where does someone go when they've just torched their entire existence? I smiled, and it felt genuine for the first time in 24 hours. Somewhere she'll never think to look. Somewhere I can figure out what the hell happens next. As I left Mikhail's office that afternoon, I felt lighter than I had in years, like I'd been carrying a weight I didn't know was there until I set it down. St. Petersburg wasn't my first choice for disappearing. If I'm being honest, it wasn't even my second or third choice. But there's something poetic about going back to the place where it all started, like a detective returning to the crime scene, except the crime was falling in love, and the victim was my own stupid heart. Clara and I had met here 12 years ago at some art gallery opening that I'd only attended because my buddy Sergey had dragged me there, promising free wine and culture. I'd found the wine, at least. And I'd found Clara, standing in front of some abstract painting that looked like someone had sneezed colors onto a canvas, and she'd turned to me and asked what I thought it meant. I'd said it looked like a visual representation of a hangover, and she'd laughed, and that was it. Game over. I was hooked like a fish who didn't know the bait was poisoned. Now here I was, 12 years and one nuclear divorce later, stepping off a train at Moskovsky railway station with one suitcase and a plan that was about 60% spite and 40% survival instinct. The city looked different in winter, or maybe I looked different, or maybe everything looks different when you're viewing it through the lens of complete emotional destruction. The snow was falling in that picturesque way that makes tourists take photos and locals curse, blanketing everything in white like the world was trying to start fresh. I wished it was that easy, just cover everything with snow and pretend the mess underneath didn't exist. I'd found an apartment online, one of those places that doesn't ask too many questions as long as you pay in cash and don't throw wild parties or commit any obvious felonies. It was in a neighborhood that estate agents would generously call up and coming, and everyone else would call sketchy but affordable. The building looked like it had been constructed during the Soviet era by people who believed that buildings should be functional and aesthetically pleasing was bourgeois nonsense. Gray concrete, small windows, a stairwell that smelled like cabbage and regret. It was perfect. The landlord was a woman named Olga who looked like she'd seen every kind of human disaster and wasn't impressed by any of them. She had that particular Russian grandmother energy that suggested she could probably kill you with her bare hands if properly motivated, but would rather just collect her rent and ignore you. "You're Leonid Karpov?" she asked, squinting at me through the crack in her door like I might be there to rob her or sell her encyclopedias. That was my new name, the one I'd paid a questionable amount of money to a guy Mikhail knew who specialized in helping people become other people. Leonid Karpov. It sounded like a character from a Cold War spy novel, which I guess was fitting because I was kind of living in one now. "That's me," I confirmed, holding up the envelope of cash like it was a peace offering. Money talks in any language, and Olga's eyes brightened when she saw it. She opened the door wider, revealing an apartment that was about the size of my former walk-in closet and had roughly the same amount of natural light. "First and last month, plus deposit," she said, counting the bills with the efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. No loud music after 10. No guests who stay longer than 3 days. No funny business. I wasn't entirely sure what constituted funny business in Olga's world, but I assured her that I was the least funny person on the planet right now, and she seemed satisfied with that answer. She handed me a key that looked like it predated the Russian Revolution and left me alone with my new life, which currently consisted of one suitcase, one apartment that smelled like old cigarettes and somebody else's memories, and absolutely no idea what I was doing. The first thing I did was change my appearance because apparently I was committing to this whole reinvention thing. I'd always been clean-shaven, the kind of guy who went to a barber every 2 weeks and paid too much for a simple haircut because Clara liked it that way. My hair had been professionally styled, kept at a length that she approved of, colored to hide the gray that was starting to creep in at my temples. Looking at myself in the bathroom mirror of my new apartment, under the fluorescent light that made everything look like a crime scene, I barely recognized the person staring back at me. Good. That was the point. I went to a pharmacy and bought box dye, the cheap kind that comes with instructions in 3 languages and warnings about possible allergic reactions. The woman at the counter looked at my natural dark brown hair and then at the box I'd chosen, which was labeled Midnight Black, and raised an eyebrow. You sure? She asked in that tone that suggested I was making a mistake, but it was my mistake to make. Positive, I told her, because nothing says new identity like committing to a hair color that would be a nightmare to grow out. I also grabbed a razor, some shaving cream, and on impulse, a pair of reading glasses with clear lenses because apparently I was method acting my way into becoming someone else. Back at the apartment, I spent the next hour transforming myself in a bathroom that was barely big enough to turn around in. The hair dye smelled like chemicals and broken dreams, and I had to leave it on for 30 minutes while contemplating my life choices. When I finally rinsed it out, my hair was black as midnight like the box had promised, which made me look either mysterious or like I was going through a midlife crisis. Probably both. Then came the beard. I'd had facial hair on and off over the years, but Clara had always preferred me clean-shaven, said it made me look more professional. Professional for what? I'd never asked. Now I took the razor and got rid of the stubble I'd been growing since the anniversary dinner, shaving my face smooth and then staring at this stranger in the mirror. Dark hair, clean-shaven, the cheap reading glasses perched on my nose. I looked like a completely different person. I looked like Leonid Karpov, whoever the hell that was. Some guy who lived in a tiny apartment in St. Petersburg and definitely wasn't a heartbroken idiot from Moscow whose wife had publicly eviscerated him. I practiced introducing myself to the mirror, which felt ridiculous but seemed necessary. Hi, I'm Leonid. Leo. I'm a translator. That last part wasn't actually a lie. I was fluent in English, French, and German thanks to an expensive international education and a semester abroad that my parents had insisted would broaden my horizons. Turns out those languages were about to save my ass because I needed money and translating was something I could do from anywhere without anyone asking too many questions about my past. I set myself up with a laptop I'd bought with cash from some electronics store that looked one inspection away from being shut down. Created new email addresses, new social media profiles with my new name, and a photo where my face was just blurry enough to be useless for identification. Started browsing freelance translation websites, the kind where businesses posted jobs and desperate freelancers bid against each other in a race to the bottom. It wasn't glamorous work. I was translating user manuals for kitchen appliances and terms of service agreements that nobody would ever read, but it paid enough to cover rent and food and the occasional bottle of vodka for when the existential dread got too loud. By day, I was Leonid the translator, sitting in my tiny apartment with my laptop, converting technical German into passable English and trying not to think about how far I'd fallen. By night, though, that's when the real me came out. That's when I'd pull up Clara's social media on a burner phone I'd bought specifically for stalking my ex-wife, because apparently healthy coping mechanisms weren't my strong suit. Instagram, Facebook, even that weird Russian social network that I'd never understood the point of. She was everywhere, smiling in every photo, living her best life without me. She'd changed her relationship status to single within 48 hours of that dinner, which seemed efficient if nothing else. The photos were what killed me though. Clara at fancy restaurants with people I recognized from our old life, holding cocktails and laughing at jokes I couldn't hear. Clara at a spa day with her friends, face masks and champagne, looking relaxed in a way I'd never seen when we were together. Clara at what looked like a gallery opening, wearing that black dress I'd always loved, standing next to people in suits who probably had more money than God. And in every single photo, every single one, I wasn't there. It was like I'd been photoshopped out of her life, erased so completely that you'd never know I'd existed at all. Not one picture from our 10 years together, not one throwback post with a caption about moving forward. Just nothing. Radio silence. Complete erasure. I scrolled through months of her life, torturing myself with evidence of her happiness, and that's when I started noticing something. There was a guy who appeared in multiple photos, always sort of in the background, but increasingly present. Tall, probably 6'2" or 6'3", with that kind of effortless style that suggested he'd been born knowing how to tie a tie and order wine. Dark hair slicked back, designer stubble that probably required more maintenance than my entire grooming routine. In the first few photos, he was just there, another face in the crowd. But as I scrolled forward in time, he got closer to Clara, standing next to her, touching her arm, whispering something in her ear that made her laugh. And then there was a photo from just last week. Clara and this mystery man at some charity gala, and his hand was on the small of her back in a way that was definitely not platonic. I zoomed in on his face, screenshotted it, and started doing what any rational person in my position would do: obsessive internet stalking. Reverse image search, social media deep dives, the whole stalker starter pack. Took me about an hour, but I found him. Roman Delayanov, business partner at Clara's company. 38 years old, graduated from some fancy business school in London, drove a car that cost more than most people's houses. His Instagram was private, but his Facebook was public, and oh look, there he was with Clara at a business conference from 6 months ago. 6 months ago. When we were still married. When I was still under the delusion that my wife loved me. My hands were shaking as I set the phone down, staring at the water-stained ceiling of my apartment and processing this new information. Obsessively scrolling through your ex-wife's social media at 3 in the morning is one thing, but if you really want to know what someone's up to, you need professional help. Not the therapy kind, though I probably needed that too. I'm talking about the kind of help that comes with a trench coat, a smoking habit, and questionable ethics. I needed a private investigator, and not just any private investigator. I needed someone who operated in that gray area between legal and, let's not talk about how I got this information. Mikhail had given me a name before I left Moscow, scrawled on a piece of paper like we were in a spy movie. Ivan Smirnov. The way Mikhail had said it, with this mix of respect and fear, told me everything I needed to know. This was a guy who got results and didn't ask permission. Finding Ivan wasn't difficult. Guys like him don't exactly hide. They operate in plain sight, tucked away in offices above Chinese restaurants or convenience stores, places where the rent is cheap and nobody pays attention to who's coming and going. His office was in a building near the Fontanka River that looked like it had survived both world wars and several renovation attempts, none of them successful. The directory in the lobby was one of those old boards with plastic letters that you slide into slots, half of them missing or replaced with numbers that didn't match. 3rd floor, suite 3B. No name, just a number. Perfect. I climbed the stairs because the elevator had an out-of-order sign that looked like it had been there since the Cold War, and honestly, I didn't trust Soviet-era machinery with my life, even on a good day. The stairwell smelled like cigarettes and decisions people regretted, which seemed appropriate. When I found Suite 3B, the door was unmarked except for a small brass plaque that said, "Consultations by appointment only." I knocked anyway because I'd learned that appointment only usually meant, I'm probably here, but want to seem more important than I am. The door opened after about 30 seconds, revealing a man who looked exactly like you'd imagine a Russian private investigator would look if central casting was being really obvious. About it. Mid-50s, maybe older, with gray hair cut military short and eyes that had seen too much and remembered all of it. He was wearing a button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up, slacks that had seen better days, and an expression that suggested I was interrupting something important, which I probably was. A cigarette dangled from his lips like it had been surgically attached there, and the office behind him was thick with smoke despite the window being cracked open. Ivan Smirnov. I asked, though I knew it was him. Who else would it be? He looked me up and down with the kind of assessment that made me feel like he'd already read my entire life story and found it moderately disappointing. Depends on who's asking, he said in a voice that sounded like he gargled gravel for fun. Classic detective answer. Mysterious, non-committal, probably practiced in the mirror. Mikhail Petrov sent me, I said, and that was apparently the magic password because his expression shifted from suspicious to merely cautious. He stepped aside and gestured for me to come in, which I did, trying not to cough as I entered what had to be the smokiest room in all of St. Petersburg. The office was exactly what you'd expect. Cluttered desk covered in files and coffee cups, a wall of filing cabinets that probably contained enough dirt on people to blackmail half the city, a laptop that looked like it had been manufactured during the Bronze Age, and photographs tacked to a corkboard with red string connecting them, like some conspiracy theorist's fever dream. There was a worn leather couch against one wall that I suspected doubled as a bed on nights when Ivan didn't feel like going home, and a mini fridge in the corner that I'd bet money only contained beer and possibly some questionable takeout. He gestured to one of the chairs across from his desk, and I sat down, grateful that it at least seemed structurally sound. So, Ivan said, settling into his own chair with the ease of someone who'd spent approximately 10,000 hours sitting in that exact spot. Mikhail doesn't send people to me unless they're in trouble or about to cause trouble. Which one are you? I appreciated his directness. No small talk, no pretense, just straight to the point. Little bit of both, I admitted, and pulled out the envelope I'd prepared. Inside was 5,000 rubles in cash, which was probably either too much or not enough. I honestly had no idea what the going rate for private investigation was. I just grabbed what felt like a serious amount of money without being insultingly small. Ivan took the envelope, counted the bills with practiced efficiency, and nodded once like I'd passed some kind of test. All right, he said, stubbing out his cigarette in an ashtray that was already overflowing with the corpses of its predecessors. What do you need? I slid my phone across the desk, showing him the photo I'd found of Clara and Roman at that gala. My wife? I said, then corrected myself because apparently my brain hadn't caught up with reality yet. My ex-wife. Clara Ivanova. I need to know everything about her relationship with this man. Roman Delianov. How long it's been going on, where they meet, what they're planning. Everything. Ivan picked up the phone, studied the photo for a long moment, and I watched something flicker across his face. Recognition, maybe. Or just the calculation of a man figuring out how complicated this job was going to be. Clara Ivanova. He repeated slowly and let out a low whistle. The Clara Ivanova? Real estate mogul? The one who's always in those society magazines wearing clothes that cost more than my car. I nodded, and he leaned back in his chair, which creaked ominously under his weight. You've got expensive taste in ex-wives, my friend. Had, I corrected. Past tense. And trust me, the cost wasn't worth the return on investment. He almost smiled at that, just a slight twitch at the corner of his mouth that suggested he'd heard similar sentiments from 100 other clients with expensive relationship problems. And Roman Delianov, he continued, pulling out a notebook that looked like it had survived a war, her business partner. I know of him. Slick guy? Drives a Porsche. Shows up at all the right parties with all the right people. He lit another cigarette, and I was starting to understand why the window was open despite it being winter. You think they're having an affair? I know they are, I said, surprised by how calm I sounded. A few weeks ago, saying those words out loud would have destroyed me. Now they just felt like facts, like saying the sky is blue or Moscow traffic is terrible. What I need to know is how long it's been going on and what else they might be up to. Because see, here's the thing. I leaned forward, and Ivan mirrored the gesture, suddenly very interested. My wife, sorry, ex-wife, she didn't just leave me. She humiliated me. Publicly. At our anniversary dinner in front of everyone we know. That's not normal divorce behavior. That's someone who wanted to destroy me, who wanted to make sure I was completely ruined before she moved on. And you think there's more to it? Ivan said, not a question but a statement. He got it. He understood that people don't usually go nuclear unless they're covering something up or protecting something. I know there's more to it, I replied. I can feel it. Call it intuition, call it paranoia, call it whatever you want. But Clara is a planner. She doesn't do anything without a reason, and she definitely doesn't burn bridges unless she's absolutely certain she'll never need them again. Which means she's got something lined up, something that made her confident enough to completely obliterate our marriage without a second thought. Ivan was nodding now, scribbling notes in his terrible handwriting that probably only he could decipher. All right, he said after a moment. I'll look into it. But I need to be clear about something. He fixed me with a stare that made me feel like I was being interrogated by the KGB. Men like me, we don't ask questions about why you want this information. We don't judge, we don't counsel, we just find facts and deliver them. But we also don't get involved in anything illegal. I'll follow them. I'll photograph them. I'll find out what they're doing and who they're doing it with. But if you're planning something that crosses lines, that's on you, not me. Understood, understood, I assured him, though privately I wasn't entirely sure what I was planning. Revenge? Justice? Just the satisfaction of knowing I was right? Probably all three mixed together with a heavy dose of spite. I'm not looking to do anything crazy. I just need to know the truth. The whole truth, not the sanitized version Clara would tell me. Ivan seemed satisfied with that answer. Give me 2 weeks, he said, standing up to shake my hand. His grip was firm, the handshake of someone who'd learned that in a different era when handshakes actually meant something. I'll tail them, see what I can find. Don't call me. I'll call you. And for God's sake, don't do anything stupid in the meantime. Don't confront her, don't show up at her place, don't send threatening messages. You want this done right. You need to be patient and smart. 2 weeks felt like an eternity, but I agreed because what choice did I have? I left Ivan's office feeling like I'd just hired a hitman, except instead of killing someone, he was going to kill my illusions about my marriage, which honestly might hurt more. The next 14 days were torture. I threw myself into translation work, spending 12-hour days converting boring corporate documents from one language to another, trying not to think about what Ivan was discovering. I started running, which I'd never done before, just putting on cheap sneakers and pounding the pavement along the Neva River until my lungs burned and my legs screamed. Physical pain was easier to deal with than emotional pain, and at least when you're running, you can pretend you're running towards something instead of away from everything. Ivan called on day 15, his voice crackling through the burner phone I'd given him the number for. "We need to meet," was all he said, and the tone told me he'd found something. Something big. We met at the same cafe where we'd first talked, a place called Cafe Pushkin that was trying very hard to be literary and artistic, but mostly just served overpriced coffee to tourists and locals who should know better. Ivan was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with a folder in front of him and that same cigarette holder expression that seemed to be his default. I sat down across from him, my heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with the running I'd been doing. Ivan slid the folder across the table like he was passing classified documents in a Cold War exchange, except instead of state secrets, it contained photographic evidence of my wife's betrayal. Ex-wife. I really needed to get that correction tattooed on my brain. The folder was thick, which seemed like a bad sign. In my experience, nothing good ever came in thick folders. Thick folders meant complications, meant layers of problems you hadn't anticipated, meant your life was about to get significantly more interesting in the worst possible way. I opened it slowly, half afraid of what I'd find, and the first thing I saw was a photo of Clara and Roman at what looked like a hotel entrance. The Astoria, if I wasn't mistaken, which was one of those places that charged more for a night than most people made in a month. They were laughing, his arm around her waist, and she was looking up at him with an expression I recognized because she used to look at me that way. Used to. Past tense. Everything about my marriage was past tense now. They've been meeting there every Tuesday and Thursday for the past 6 months, Ivan said, his voice flat and professional, like he was reading a weather report instead of documenting the systematic destruction of my marriage. Always the same room. Presidential suite. They check in separately, leave separately, but the hotel staff confirmed they're together. I talked to a maid who was very chatty after I bought her lunch and showed appropriate interest in her opinions about the guests. He lit another cigarette, and I was starting to think the man ran on nicotine and cynicism. They're not subtle about it. Ordering room service, champagne, the works. Your wife has expensive taste in affairs. Yeah, well, she had expensive taste in everything. I muttered, flipping through more photos. There they were at restaurants I recognized, places Clara and I used to go. That felt particularly cruel, like she was rewriting our history with Roman in my place. There were photos of them at what looked like business meetings, except the body language was way too intimate for business. His hand on her knee under the table, her leaning in close to whisper something. The kind of casual touching that only happens when people are very comfortable with each other. 6 months. I repeated, doing the math in my head. So this started while we were still very much married. While I was planning our anniversary dinner like an idiot. It gets better, Ivan said, and his tone suggested it absolutely did not get better. He pulled out another set of photos, these ones taken from a distance with a telephoto lens. Clara and Roman at what looked like a construction site, examining blueprints with a group of men in hard hats. I followed them to this development project on the outskirts of Moscow. Big money, lots of investors. They're working on some luxury apartment complex that's supposed to be the next hot property for rich people with more money than sense. He tapped one of the photos where a man in an expensive suit was shaking hands with Roman. That's Dmitry Volkov. Know him? I squinted at the photo. The name sounded vaguely familiar, the kind of name you hear at parties when people are trying to impress each other with their connections. Should I? Ivan leaned back, and the chair creaked in protest. Volkov is connected. And when I say connected, I mean the kind of connections that make people nervous. Money laundering, fraud, possibly some light weapons trading on the side. Nothing proven, Of course, because guys like him are very good at keeping their hands clean. But he's been on the authorities' radar for years. That got my attention. I set down my coffee cup, which I'd been holding more for something to do with my hands than because I actually wanted to drink from it. The coffee was terrible anyway, burnt and bitter, matching my mood perfectly. You're telling me Clara and Roman are doing business with a criminal? Ivan shrugged. I'm telling you they're doing business with a guy who associates with criminals. Could be they don't know. Could be they do know and don't care. Could be they're actively involved in whatever shady stuff he's up to. That's what you hire me to find out, right? Well, I'm finding out, and it's messy. He pulled out more documents from the folder, photocopies of what looked like financial records. I've got a guy who works in property registration. He owes me favors from way back. These are records of shell companies, money moving through accounts registered in Cyprus and the Cayman Islands. Your wife's name shows up. So does Roman's. So does Volkov's. They're moving a lot of money around, and not in ways that suggest everything is above board. I stared at the numbers, feeling my anger shift into something colder and more calculating. This wasn't just an affair. This was bigger. Clara hadn't just cheated on me emotionally. She'd possibly been using our marriage as cover for whatever financial crimes she was committing with her lover and their shady business partner. There's more, Ivan said, because apparently the universe had decided I needed to be hit with every possible betrayal in one sitting. He pulled out his phone, scrolled through some files, and turned the screen to face me. These are text messages. I've got a contact who can access phone records if the price is right and the cause is just. Your wife and Roman have been very busy texting each other. Want to read them, or should I give you the highlights? I grabbed the phone, scrolling through messages that made my blood pressure spike with every word. Can't wait for Tuesday. He's so clueless, it's almost sad. After the anniversary, it'll all be over. That one stopped me cold. After the anniversary. The anniversary where she'd publicly humiliated me. Once he's gone, we can start fresh. Once he's gone. I read that line 3 times, trying to parse what gone meant. Gone as in divorced and out of her life? Or gone as in something more permanent? I looked up at Ivan, who was watching me with the expression of someone who'd seen this kind of thing before and knew it never ended well. What do you think they meant by gone? I asked, hating how my voice shook slightly. He took a long drag from his cigarette. In my experience, nothing good. Could mean they were planning to divorce you and take everything. Could mean they were planning something worse. I've seen enough of these situations to know that when people start talking about someone being gone, you should probably watch your back. Make it look like his fault. I read aloud from another message. What does that mean? Make what look like my fault. Ivan leaned forward, his expression serious. Could be they were planning to frame you for something. Set you up to take the fall for their business dealings. If things went south with Volkov and the authorities started investigating, having a convenient scapegoat would be useful. Rich guy, suddenly divorced, acting erratic, making bad business decisions. Easy to pin financial crimes on someone like that. The picture was coming together, and it was uglier than I'd imagined. This wasn't just infidelity. This was conspiracy. They'd been planning to destroy me, legally and possibly financially, maybe even physically. That toast at the anniversary dinner wasn't a spontaneous decision born from unhappiness. It was calculated. It was a public declaration that I was unstable, unreliable, someone whose word couldn't be trusted when I inevitably protested my innocence. I felt something cold settle in my chest, pushing out the last remnants of heartbreak and replacing them with pure determination. I need copies of everything, I told Ivan. Every photo, every document, every text message. I need proof of all of this. He nodded, like he'd been expecting this. Already made you a complete set. It's in the folder. I also put everything on a flash drive because you should have redundant copies of this stuff. Trust me, you don't want to lose this evidence. He pulled out a small USB drive and slid it across the table. But I need to ask you something. What are you planning to do with this information? That was the question, wasn't it? What was I going to do? I could go to the police, but with Clara's connections and money, they'd probably just bury it. I could confront her directly, but that would tip her off that I knew, and she'd have time to cover her tracks or worse, accelerate whatever plans she had for getting me gone. I could disappear even further, take my money and run to some country without an extradition treaty and spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder. None of those options felt right. None of them felt like justice. I don't know yet, I admitted. but I'll figure it out. And when I do, I want to make sure it's airtight. No room for error, no way for them to weasel out of it. Ivan studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. All right, but let me give you some advice, free of charge. Whatever you're planning, be smart about it. People like Clara and Roman, they've got resources. They've got connections. If you come at them, you better make sure you don't miss, because you won't get a second shot. He stubbed out his cigarette and stood up, our meeting apparently over. Stay in touch. If you need more surveillance or information, you know where to find me. And watch your back. If they were talking about getting you gone, they might still be planning something. I left the cafe with the folder and flash drive feeling like I was carrying explosives. In a way, I was. This information could blow up Clara's life, Roman's life, possibly bring down whatever criminal enterprise they were involved in with Volkov. But it could also blow up in my face if I wasn't careful. I needed a plan, and not just any plan. I needed something brilliant and foolproof and completely devastating. I went back to my tiny apartment and spread everything out on the floor, photos and documents, creating a map of betrayal across the worn carpet. My laptop sat nearby, and I stared at it for a long moment before a thought occurred to me. Clara always thought she was smarter than me. It was one of her favorite subtle put-downs, the way she'd explain things like I was a child who needed extra help understanding basic concepts. She thought she was clever, covering her tracks, playing her games. But Clara had one fatal flaw that I'd always known about, but never thought to exploit. She was terrible with passwords. She used the same password for everything. Love Clara 2010, the year we'd started dating. She'd never changed it, not once in 12 years, despite me suggesting multiple times that using the same password for every account was a security nightmare. She'd just laugh and say who would want to hack her anyway. She wasn't that interesting. Turns out, she was more interesting than I'd thought, just not in good ways. I opened my laptop and navigated to the email provider we both used. Typed in her email address. Hesitated for just a moment, my finger hovering over the keyboard, crossing a line I couldn't uncross. Then I typed, Love Clara 2010. Hit enter. And just like that, I was in. Her entire digital life spread out before me like a book I'd been given permission to read. Emails from Roman, emails from Volkov, emails from lawyers and accountants, and people I'd never heard of. I started at the beginning, months back, and began reading everything, downloading everything, building a case against my own wife that would make prosecutors weep with joy. After spending 3 days reading through Clara's emails like they were the world's most depressing novel series, I needed to disappear even further. St. Petersburg suddenly felt too close to Moscow, too connected to the life I was trying to leave behind. I needed somewhere remote, somewhere nobody would think to look for me, somewhere I could process everything I'd learned and figure out my next move without worrying about Clara or Roman or their criminal buddy Volkov showing up to make me gone in the permanent sense. So naturally, I decided to move to Siberia, because when you're having an emotional breakdown and planning revenge, why not do it somewhere where the temperature can literally kill you if you're not careful? I found a village called Ustianera, which sounded like something out of a fairy tale, but was actually just a collection of buildings in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by forests and mountains, and the kind of isolation that makes you question your life choices. The kind of place where the postal service came once a month if you were lucky, and the nearest grocery store was a 3-hour drive away. Perfect. I told Ivan where I was going, because someone needed to know in case I died of exposure or bear attack, and he looked at me like I'd announced I was moving to Mars. Siberia, he'd said, shaking his head. That's not running away. That's running to the edge of the earth and then jumping off. You sure about this? I wasn't sure about anything anymore, but I went anyway. The train ride took forever. Hours upon hours of watching the landscape change from city to countryside to increasingly hostile wilderness. I shared a compartment with an old woman who was knitting something that might have been a sweater or might have been a punishment. I couldn't tell. She didn't ask questions, which I appreciated, just clacked away with her needles and occasionally offered me hard candies that tasted like they'd been manufactured during the Stalin era. By the time I reached the closest station to Ustianera, I'd read every email in Clara's account twice, memorized bank account numbers, and developed a plan that was either brilliant or completely insane. Probably both. The cabin I'd rented sight unseen from a guy named Yuri who I'd found through some sketchy online forum was exactly as advertised, which is to say it was terrible but functional. One room, a wood stove that looked like it had been salvaged from a museum, a bed that was more of a wooden platform with a thin mattress, and walls that I suspected provided about as much insulation as a cardboard box. The windows were small and frosted over, and there was a persistent draft that came from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. The bathroom was an outhouse about 50 feet from the cabin, which meant any midnight bathroom trips required getting fully dressed and potentially encountering wildlife. Living the dream, truly. But you know what? It was perfect. Nobody knew where I was. Nobody could find me even if they tried. I had no neighbors except for the occasional bear who wandered by and stared at me through the window like I was the intruder in his forest, which, fair point, I was. I spent my days chopping wood because that's what you do in Siberia if you want to not freeze to death. And let me tell you, chopping wood is surprisingly therapeutic. Every swing of the axe felt like I was cutting through my old life, splitting it into pieces small enough to burn. I got pretty good at it too. Turned out I had a lot of aggression to work through, and wood was a much healthier target than the alternative. The nights were harder. When the sun went down, which it did very early and very thoroughly in Siberian winter, the darkness was absolute. No street lights, no car headlights, no ambient glow from the city. Just darkness so complete it felt like being inside a cave. I'd sit by the wood stove, reading by lamplight because electricity was spotty at best, working my way through Russian literature because apparently my brain decided this was the perfect time to get cultured. Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, Chekhov, all the greatest hits of Russian misery. It felt appropriate. I was living in a cabin in Siberia reading about other people's suffering and somehow finding it comforting. This was either character development or a complete psychological breakdown, and honestly, I wasn't sure there was much difference anymore. I called Ivan once a week using a satellite phone that I'd bought from a guy in St. Petersburg who asked no questions and took cash. The connection was terrible, lots of static and delay, like talking to someone on the moon. But Ivan's updates came through clearly enough. "She thinks you're dead," he told me one night, his voice crackling through the interference. "Not literally dead, but dead to the world. She's been telling people you had a breakdown after the divorce, that you disappeared, that she's worried about you." The last part made me laugh so hard I almost dropped the phone. Clara worried about me? Please. The woman who'd wished me out of existence was now playing the concerned ex-wife card? That was rich. What's she telling them exactly? I asked, watching snow fall outside my window in sheets so thick I could barely see the trees 20 feet away. That you couldn't handle the split, Ivan said. That you became unstable, made some poor financial decisions, and vanished. She's painting herself as the victim here, the poor woman whose husband fell apart and abandoned everything. Some people are buying it. Others, not so much. But she's got enough credibility and sympathy that most of her social circle is taking her side. Of course they were. Clara was always good at controlling narratives, shaping stories to make herself look good. It was one of her talents, right up there with picking out expensive wine and destroying people's lives. Let her think I'm broken, I said, and I meant it. Let her think she won. Let her get comfortable and confident and careless. Because that's when people make mistakes. Ivan was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was careful, measured. "What are you planning, friend? Because I've been doing this job for a long time, and I know that tone. That's the tone of someone planning something big." I smiled at my reflection in the frosted window, barely recognizing the bearded, weathered face staring back at me. Revenge doesn't need fireworks, Ivan. It needs patience and good Wi-Fi. And I've got plenty of both. The weeks blurred together in Siberia. Wake up, chop wood, eat something that could generously be called food, but was mostly just calories to keep me alive, translate some documents for money, read more depressing Russian literature, sleep, repeat. I grew a beard because shaving seemed pointless, and also because the extra face insulation was actually helpful in the cold. My hands got calloused from the axe work. I lost weight because apparently living in Siberia and eating mostly canned goods is a very effective diet plan, though I wouldn't recommend it. I looked like a completely different person from the guy who'd stood at that anniversary dinner. I looked like someone who'd gone to war and come back different, which, in a way, I had. But I wasn't just surviving out there in the wilderness. I was planning. Every night, I'd boot up my laptop, connect to the satellite internet that cost a fortune and worked about as well as you'd expect, and continue building my case against Clara and Roman. I downloaded everything from Clara's email before she could realize someone had accessed her account. Every incriminating message, every financial document, every piece of evidence that proved they weren't just having an affair, but were actively involved in fraud and money laundering. I organized it all, created folders and subfolders, cross-referenced dates and amounts, built a timeline of their criminal enterprise that would make prosecutors salivate. I found out things I wish I hadn't, like how they'd laughed about me, called me the puppy in their messages because apparently I was so trusting and loyal it was funny to them. How they discussed the best way to humiliate me at the anniversary dinner. How Clara had actually practiced her toast to make sure it had maximum impact. How they'd planned to frame me for their money laundering scheme, setting up accounts in my name, forging my signature on documents, creating a paper trail that would lead investigators straight to me while they walked away clean. It was sophisticated, I had to admit. Evil, but sophisticated. There were moments, alone in that cabin with nothing but the wind howling outside and my thoughts howling inside, when I wondered if I should just let it go. Take my money, disappear to some tropical beach, change my name permanently, and live out my days as someone else entirely. Let Clara and Roman have their criminal empire and their affair and their perfect life built on lies. I could be free of all of it, free of the anger and the hurt and the burning need for justice that was consuming me from the inside out. But then I'd remember her face at that dinner, that smile that said she thought she'd won, and I'd know I couldn't let it go. Not because I still loved her, I definitely didn't anymore, but because people like Clara and Roman needed to learn that actions have consequences, and betrayal has a price. My sister Sophia called one night, somehow getting through on the satellite phone despite the interference. "Are you alive?" were her first words, which seemed like a reasonable question given that I'd basically vanished off the face of the earth. "Depends on your definition of alive," I told her. "I'm breathing, eating, existing. Is that alive?" She sighed, and I could picture her shaking her head in that way she did when I was being difficult. "Everyone's worried. Mom's worried. Dad's worried. I'm worried. Clara's telling everyone you had a breakdown." The way she said Clara's name suggested she wasn't buying whatever story my ex-wife was selling. "I did have a breakdown," I admitted. "But I'm putting myself back together, just in a different configuration. Like reverse Humpty Dumpty. All the pieces are there. They're just arranged differently now." Sophia was quiet for a moment. "Where are you? And please don't say Siberia because that would be insane." I looked around at my cabin, at the wood stove and the frozen windows and the complete isolation, and smiled. "Would I lie to you?" "Yes," she said immediately. "You absolutely would." "Fair point. I'm somewhere safe," I told her. "Somewhere I can think clearly without distractions. I'll come back when I'm ready, when everything's in place." "When what's in place?" she asked. "Just trust me, and tell Mom and Dad I'm fine." 3 months into my Siberian exile, Ivan called with news that made me drop the piece of what I'd been about to throw into the stove. "They're making their move," he said, his voice cutting through the static like a knife. "Big shipment coming in next week. Warehouse on the outskirts of Moscow. Whatever they've been planning, this is it." My heart started racing in a way that had nothing to do with the physical labor I'd been doing. This was it. The moment I'd been waiting for, the opportunity I'd been preparing for during all those cold nights reading their emails and building my case. "Tell me everything," I said, grabbing a notebook and pen because suddenly my isolated cabin in the middle of nowhere felt like a command center. Ivan rattled off details that he'd pieced together from following them, bribing the right people, and generally being excellent at his job. Clara and Roman were meeting with Volkov and several other men at an old factory that had been abandoned for years, the kind of place that probably had more rats than square footage. They were moving a shipment of something. Ivan wasn't entirely sure what, but the money involved was substantial. Millions of rubles changing hands, documents being signed, the kind of transaction that definitely wasn't legal and definitely wasn't something you want documented. "When?" I asked, already mentally planning my return to Moscow. "Next Thursday night, 11 p.m. I've got the exact address." He paused, and I could hear him lighting another cigarette through the phone. "What are you thinking of doing? Because if you're planning what I think you're planning, you need to be very careful. These aren't people you want to mess with." I smiled, looking at my reflection in the dark window, barely recognizing the bearded, hardened man staring back at me. "I'm thinking it's time to come home, Ivan. Time to remind Clara that some ghosts don't stay buried." The journey back to Moscow felt surreal, like I was traveling back in time to a life that had belonged to someone else. I'd cleaned up a bit before leaving Siberia, trimmed my beard to something less mountain man and more guy who made deliberate style choices, put on clothes that didn't smell like wood smoke in isolation. But I kept the edge, the hardness that 3 months of chopping wood and plotting revenge had given me. I needed that edge for what was coming next. Ivan met me at the train station, and his eyes widened when he saw me. "You look different," he said, which was probably the understatement of the century. "I am different," I replied. We spent the next few days preparing. Ivan showed me surveillance photos of the warehouse, the layout, the usual security measures. It was perfect for what they were doing, isolated enough that nobody would notice unusual activity, but still accessible enough for trucks and vehicles to come and go. The building itself was massive, one of those Soviet-era industrial complexes that had been built to last forever and now just sat there decaying gracefully, waiting for someone to either renovate it or tear it down. There were multiple entrances, plenty of places to hide, and most importantly, plenty of places to observe without being seen. "The meeting's scheduled for 11, Ivan said, pointing to a spot on the map where he'd marked the main entrance. "They usually show up separately, Clara first, then Roman, then Volkov and his associates. They think they're being careful, but they're predictable. Same pattern every time." I studied the layout, memorizing exits and sight lines. "How many people are we talking about?" Ivan considered. "Clara, Roman, Volkov for sure. Probably 4 or 5 other guys, Volkov's muscle and business partners. They're not going to be armed, probably. This is supposed to be a business transaction, but I wouldn't bet my life on it." Thursday night arrived cold and clear, the kind of Moscow winter night where your breath freezes in the air and every sound carries further than it should. I dressed in all black, not because I was trying to be dramatic, but because blending into shadows seemed like a practical choice. Ivan drove me to a spot about half a mile from the warehouse, a location where his car wouldn't be noticed, but where I could approach on foot. "You've got the camera?" he asked for the 3rd time, and I held up the small device that I'd bought specifically for this. High-quality video, night vision capability, audio recording, everything I needed to document whatever was about to happen. "I've got it," I assured him. "And I've got the evidence files backed up in 3 different locations, so even if something happens to me tonight, everything gets released automatically." Ivan looked at me with something that might have been respect or might have been concern, possibly both. "You've thought this through." "I've had a lot of time to think," I replied. 3 months in Siberia with nothing but my thoughts and questionable canned meat. Makes you very thorough. I approached the warehouse on foot, moving carefully through the shadows of other abandoned buildings that surrounded it. The area was like a graveyard of Soviet industry, concrete and rust, and broken windows as far as you could see. It would have been depressing if I wasn't so focused on my mission. I found a good vantage point, an old loading dock area that had a clear view of the main entrance, but was high enough and dark enough that I'd be invisible. I settled in, camera ready, and waited. Clara arrived first, exactly like Ivan had predicted. She pulled up in her Mercedes, all sleek lines and expensive German engineering, and stepped out wearing that red coat she'd always loved. Even from a distance, even knowing everything I knew about her now, she was still beautiful. That was the worst part. How someone could be so beautiful on the outside and so ugly on the inside. She looked around nervously, checking her phone, and then walked into the warehouse like she owned the place. Which, knowing Clara, she probably thought she did. Roman showed up 10 minutes later in his Porsche, because of course he drove a Porsche. He was tall and confident, moving with the kind of ease that came from never having faced real consequences for anything in his life. That was about to change. I watched him enter the warehouse, and then I waited for Volkov and his crew. They arrived in 2 black SUVs that screamed, "We're definitely doing something illegal," parking in a way that blocked the main entrance like they were worried about needing to make a quick exit. I moved closer, finding a broken window on the 2nd floor that gave me a perfect view of the main floor below. The warehouse was mostly empty except for some old machinery and crates, but they'd set up a makeshift meeting area with a table and chairs that looked ridiculous in the cavernous space. I started recording just as they all gathered around the table. Clara stood next to Roman, close enough that their shoulders touched, and I felt nothing. No jealousy, no pain, just cold satisfaction that I was about to catch them in the act. Volkov was speaking, gesturing to papers on the table, and I adjusted the camera's zoom to capture everything. Even without hearing every word, the scene was clear. Money changing hands, documents being signed, a shipment being discussed with hand gestures that suggested large quantities of something they definitely shouldn't be moving. Clara laughed at something Roman said, touching his arm, and I captured that too. Every moment of their criminal conspiracy, every piece of evidence prosecutors would need. Once he's gone, we're untouchable, Roman said, his voice carrying in the empty warehouse, and I realized he was talking about me. I told you, Clara whispered, but her voice carried too. He was too soft, too trusting. We could have robbed him blind, and he wouldn't have noticed until it was too late. She was right about that. I had been too soft, too trusting. But soft things can harden when you leave them in the cold long enough, and I'd spent 3 months in Siberia freezing into something new. I didn't stick around to watch the rest of their meeting. I had everything I needed on camera, every incriminating word and gesture captured in high definition. I climbed down from my perch carefully, making sure not to make any noise that would alert them to my presence. The last thing I needed was Volkov's muscle coming after me before I could execute the final phase of my plan. Ivan was waiting where I'd left him, engine running, looking nervous in a way I'd never seen from him before. "You get it?" he asked as soon as I climbed into the car. I held up the camera like it was a trophy. Every single second. "It's beautiful, Ivan. Netflix-worthy." We drove to a location I'd scouted earlier, a 24-hour internet cafe that catered to insomniacs and people doing things they probably shouldn't be doing online. Perfect for my purposes. I uploaded everything to the cloud, made copies, and then sat down to compose the most important email of my life. The recipient? Chief Inspector Anatoly Petrov of Moscow's Financial Crimes Division, a man whose reputation for hating corruption was legendary. I'd done my research during those long Siberian nights. Petrov was incorruptible, a rare breed in Russian law enforcement, and he'd been trying to nail people like Volkov for years. "Dear Inspector Petrov," I typed, my fingers flying across the keyboard with purpose. "I'm writing to provide evidence of an ongoing criminal enterprise involving fraud, money laundering, and illegal weapons trading." I attached everything. The emails from Clara's account, the financial records, the photos Ivan had taken, and the video from tonight. Years of criminal activity, packaged and delivered with a bow. I hit send at exactly 2:47 a.m. and felt something release in my chest that I hadn't known was there. The police moved fast. Faster than I'd expected, which suggested that Petrov had been waiting for exactly this kind of gift. By dawn, SWAT teams had surrounded the warehouse. I watched from a safe distance as they stormed in, and the satisfaction was better than any therapy could have provided. Clara's scream echoed across the empty industrial complex when they slapped handcuffs on her wrists. Roman tried to run, which was honestly hilarious considering he was surrounded by armed officers. Volkov just stood there looking resigned, like he'd always known this day would come. The morning news was poetry. Billionaire Clara Ivanova arrested in multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. The headline scrolled across every channel, accompanied by her mugshot that somehow managed to make her look both furious and terrified. Roman's photo was next to hers, and he looked like a raccoon who'd been caught raiding someone's trash can at 3 in the morning. Volkov's mugshot completed the collection, stoic and unbothered like getting arrested was just another Tuesday. Ivan texted me a single word, "Finished." I texted back, "No, Ivan. They did it to themselves." I just held the mirror. Then I turned off my phone, walked out of the cafe into the Moscow dawn, and smiled for the first time in months. Real justice, it turned out, was even sweeter than I'd imagined. Lisbon smells like salt and freedom, which sounds poetic but is actually just accurate. The sea breeze comes off the Atlantic every morning, carrying with it the promise that yesterday doesn't matter and tomorrow is yours to design. I live in a small apartment in Alfama now, the old district where the streets are so narrow you can touch both walls if you spread your arms wide enough. My neighbors are mostly elderly Portuguese ladies who treat me like an adopted grandson and occasionally leave food outside my door when they think I'm not eating enough. They call me Alex Orlov, and they have no idea that name is as real as a $3 bill. My mornings start with coffee at a cafe down the street where the owner, Miguel, makes the best espresso I've ever had, and doesn't ask questions about why a Russian guy suddenly showed up speaking decent Portuguese and looking like he was running from something. Maybe everyone in Lisbon is running from something. It's that kind of city, full of people reinventing themselves against a backdrop of colorful tiles and ancient tramways. I spend my afternoons writing, which surprised me as much as anyone. Turns out I have stories to tell now, though I changed the names and locations because I'm not completely stupid. My sister Sophia calls sometimes, usually when she's had wine and is feeling nostalgic. "You're really never coming back?" she asked last week, and I could hear Moscow traffic in the background, that familiar sound of horns and shouting that I don't miss at all. "Nope," I told her, watching sunset paint the Tagus River gold from my window. "Russia already had its shot at me, and it missed." She laughed at that, but it was sad laughter. "Mom asks about you. Dad too. They want to know when you're coming home for a visit. Tell them maybe next year," I said, lying through my teeth because we both knew I wasn't coming back. "Tell them I'm happy, because I actually am. And that's the weird part, the part that makes this whole ridiculous story worth it. I'm happy. Not in the fake way I was happy when I was married to Clara, pretending everything was fine while ignoring the cracks forming beneath my feet. Real happy. The kind that comes from knowing exactly who you are and not apologizing for it. Sometimes I wonder if Clara ever thinks about that toast, if she ever regrets wishing me out of her life while she's sitting in whatever prison cell they've got her in. Probably not. People like Clara don't do regret. They do excuses and justifications and blame everyone else for their choices. But if she does ever think about it, late at night when the prison is quiet and there's nothing to distract her from her thoughts, I hope she remembers this. She wished I'd never been in her life. Now I'm not. And honestly, that's the happiest ending I could have written. Living well isn't just the best revenge, it's the only revenge that actually matters. After spending $22,000 to organize the event, my fiancé said, "Your proposal wasn't good enough. You need you to do it again." In front of her friends. I said, "You deserve better." So I hired a billboard company. What she read driving to work the next morning wasn't another proposal. Look, I'm not saying I'm an idiot, but I did drop $22,000 on a marriage proposal, so you can draw your own conclusions here. 22 grand. That's a decent used car. That's a semester of college if you're shopping smart. That's roughly 800 Chipotle burritos with guac. And honestly, the burritos probably would have brought me more long-term happiness, but hindsight's a real pain in the ass like that. The proposal itself? Oh, it was perfect. I'm talking luxury rooftop garden with a view that made the city look like God himself had placed each building there for our romantic convenience. I hired a string quartet. Not just any string quartet, but the kind that usually plays at weddings where the bride's father owns a yacht with a smaller yacht attached to it. Custom lighting that made the whole scene glow, like we were floating in some kind of Instagram filter come to life. And here's where I really went off the rails with the whole thing. I had her favorite perfume. This ridiculously expensive Chanel number that costs more per ounce than premium gasoline, misted through the air like we were shooting a commercial for engagement rings or luxury sedans or whatever rich people buy when they're feeling emotional. Everything was choreographed down to the second. The skyline sparkled on cue like it had gotten the memo about my big moment. Champagne flowed. The good stuff too. None of that Andre nonsense you bring to a college party. When I dropped down on one knee, and I mean really committed to the kneel with both hands on that little velvet box, random strangers on nearby rooftops actually started clapping. Clapping. Like we were the feel-good finale of some romantic comedy where the quirky guy finally gets the girl and everyone learns a valuable lesson about love. The photographer I'd hired for an ungodly sum captured every single moment, every tear rolling down my cheek, every sparkle of that ring that cost more than my first car. She said yes. Of course she said yes. How could she not with all that production value surrounding us? I cried actual tears of joy, the kind you can't fake even if you're trying. My voice cracked when I told her I loved her, and I meant every syllable. The photographer's camera clicked away like it was documenting the moon landing. For one perfect moment, suspended there above the city with champagne bubbles floating around us and a string quartet playing something classical and moving, I genuinely believed I'd nailed it. I'd created the perfect moment. I was the boyfriend, no, fiancé, of the year. For exactly 1 week, we were a social media fairy tale. Her Instagram post about the proposal got more likes than anything she'd ever posted, including that time she accidentally went semi-viral for a photo with her dog wearing sunglasses. Comments rolled in like a tidal wave of heart emojis and "OMG you guys, and this is what true love looks like." Her friends shared it. Her mom shared it. Random people I went to high school with who I'm pretty sure blocked me years ago suddenly wanted to congratulate us. I was riding high, feeling like I'd accomplished something genuinely special, like I'd leveled up in the game of life and unlocked some achievement that came with a sense of purpose and those little notifications that make your brain release happy chemicals. Then came the dinner with her friends. The same crew of women who genuinely believe that brunch is a personality trait and that having strong opinions about bottomless mimosas counts as having a worldview. We met at some trendy place downtown where the menu doesn't list prices because if you have to ask, you probably shouldn't be eating there. The kind of restaurant where they describe every dish like it's a poem and the waiter introduces himself like you're about to become lifelong friends. That's when everything started sliding sideways. One of her friends, let's call her Brittany because every friend group has a Brittany and she's always causing problems, bragged about how her boyfriend proposed to her in a helicopter hovering over the Hollywood sign. A helicopter. Because apparently, ground-based proposals are for peasants and people who have reasonable financial boundaries. Another friend, who I'm pretty sure works in marketing and never lets anyone forget it, mentioned how her man proposed during a Beyoncé concert, somehow getting Beyoncé herself to acknowledge them on the Jumbotron. At a Beyoncé concert. I didn't even know that was possible without having connections to the Illuminati or whatever secret society runs celebrity events. My fiancée. Let's call her Sierra because that's the kind of name that fits someone who would do what she's about to do. Smiled politely through all these stories. She nodded in all the right places, made the appropriate sounds, sipped her overpriced wine like she was judging its quality for a lifestyle blog. I should have seen it coming. I should have noticed the way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes, or how she kept glancing at me with this look I couldn't quite read, but probably should have interpreted as warning. Incoming disaster. Then, right there between the appetizers and the main course, right when I was starting to relax and think maybe we'd escaped the comparison trap, Sierra put down her wine glass, looked at me with those eyes that I'd spent $22,000 trying to impress, and stabbed my ego with the precision of a steak knife hitting a ribeye. Honestly, she said, and let me tell you, nothing good ever follows the word honestly when it's said in that particular tone. Your proposal wasn't that special. I mean, it was nice and everything, but I think you should redo it. Properly. The table went quiet for exactly half a second, just long enough for the words to land and detonate, before everyone started laughing. Not uncomfortable laughing, not nervous laughing, but genuine amusement like she'd just made the cutest joke in the world. Like asking your fiancé to repropose because the first $22,000 attempt wasn't Instagram-worthy enough was somehow adorable and quirky instead of completely unhinged. I just smiled. That's what you do in moments like that, right? You smile because you're in public and making a scene would be worse than sitting there taking the hit. You smile because her friends are watching and you don't want to be the guy who can't take a joke. You smile because some deeply ingrained part of your brain still thinks maybe you can smooth this over. Maybe you misunderstood. Maybe she didn't just publicly announce that your grand romantic gesture was basically a participation trophy. But inside, something cracked. Not like a plate dropping and shattering into obvious pieces that everyone can see. More like a windshield getting hit by a rock on the highway. One small point of impact that spiderwebs out into 1,000 tiny fractures you don't notice until the sun hits it wrong, and suddenly you realize the whole thing is compromised and probably needs to be replaced before it becomes a safety hazard. I sat there with my smile plastered on, nodding along as the conversation moved to other topics, and all I could think about was that receipt. That $22,000 receipt sitting in my email inbox. A digital reminder that I'd just spent the equivalent of a decent used car on a moment that my fiancé had just rated somewhere between meh and please try again. The rest of dinner passed in a blur of overpriced entrees and fake laughter. I said the right things at the right times, laughed when everyone else laughed, played the part of the good boyfriend. Sorry, fiancé, who could roll with the punches. But that crack inside kept spreading, each new fracture adding to the web of realization that maybe, just maybe, I'd made a terrible mistake. And I'm not talking about the proposal. The ride home from that dinner was quieter than a library during finals week and about twice as tense. Sierra scrolled through her phone in the passenger seat, probably texting her friends about how hilarious her little roast session had been, while I gripped the steering wheel and tried to figure out if car insurance covers vehicular homicide committed during a moment of extreme emotional distress. Spoiler alert, it doesn't. And also, I'm not actually a murderer. I just play one in my increasingly dark internal monologue. We got back to our apartment. Well, technically my apartment that she'd basically moved into over the past year, filling it with throw pillows that served no functional purpose and scented candles that all somehow smelled exactly the same despite having names like Tuscan Sunrise and Midnight Jasmine. She kicked off her heels, the expensive ones she'd bought specifically for Instagram photos, and headed straight for the kitchen to make herself some detox tea. Because of course she drinks detox tea. Of course. I stood there in the living room, still wearing my jacket, watching her move around my kitchen like she owned the place, and tried to process what had just happened. $22,000. A string quartet. Champagne that cost more per bottle than most people spend on their monthly cell phone bill. Custom lighting. Perfume misted through the freaking air like we were in a Chanel commercial directed by someone who really wanted that Oscar. And her verdict was not that special. Sierra settled onto the couch with her tea, the steam rising up and probably cleansing her aura or aligning her chakras or whatever pseudo-spiritual nonsense detox tea is supposed to do besides make you pee a lot. She patted the cushion next to her, inviting me to sit down like we were about to have a totally normal conversation about our totally normal evening, where she definitely hadn't just publicly humiliated me in front of her entire friend group. So, she said, blowing on her tea with this casual energy that suggested she had absolutely zero awareness of the nuclear bomb she'd dropped at dinner. I've been thinking about the proposal redo. Oh, she'd been thinking about it. How wonderful. How absolutely delightful that she'd been using her brain cells to plan the sequel to my financial suicide. You can just hire professionals next time, she continued, like she was suggesting I hire someone to mow the lawn instead of asking me to orchestrate another multi-$1,000 spectacle. There are companies that specialize in this stuff. Like, they plan the whole thing, make it go viral, get it on the news. Some of them even have connections with celebrities who can make cameos. I stared at her, just straight up stared, trying to figure out if she was pranking me, if maybe this was some elaborate test of my patience or my commitment or my ability to withstand psychological torture. She sipped her detox tea like she wasn't currently detoxing from common sense, her face completely serene, waiting for my response. The credit card receipt flashed through my mind again. $22,000. I'd been eating ramen for 2 months leading up to that proposal, saving every penny, skipping lunches, turning down nights out with friends because I was determined to make that moment perfect. I'd called in favors, researched the best vendors, spent hours planning every single detail down to the exact shade of lighting that would make the ring sparkle most impressively. And now she wanted me to do it again, except bigger, better, more expensive, with professional viral moment coordinators and maybe a Kardashian cameo if I could swing it. Something inside me clicked. Not the crack from dinner. That was still there, spreading like the roots of a tree under pavement, but something else. Something colder and clearer and significantly more pissed off. You're right, I said, keeping my voice perfectly calm, almost monotone. You deserve better. Her face lit up like I'd just told her she won the lottery. Exactly. She set down her tea and grabbed my hand, squeezing it with genuine enthusiasm. I knew you'd understand. And honestly, babe, it's not even about the money. It's about the experience, you know? The story we'll tell our kids someday. Oh, Dad proposed twice because the first time wasn't good enough. That's romantic. That's romantic. The woman just described me spending potentially another 22 grand as a cute anecdote for hypothetical future children, and she thought that was romantic. I wondered briefly if you could develop a brain aneurysm from sheer disbelief, because I was pretty sure I felt something pop in my skull. Yeah, I said, pulling my hand back under the pretense of needing to take off my jacket. Super romantic. She didn't catch the sarcasm. Of course she didn't. Sierra had the sarcasm detection capabilities of a golden retriever, sweet, enthusiastic, and completely oblivious to subtext. I'm so glad we're on the same page, she said, picking up her phone and starting to type rapidly with her thumbs. I'm going to send you some links. There are these Pinterest boards I've been following, epic proposal redos that go viral. And some of them are just incredible. Like, there's this one where the guy rented out an entire theme park, and another where they did it during a flash mob in Times Square with professional dancers. She kept talking, rattling off increasingly absurd proposal scenarios like she was ordering from a menu, but I'd stopped listening. My brain had shifted into a different gear entirely, one that was less focused on romance and more focused on revenge. No, not revenge. That sounded too dramatic, too villain origin story. Let's call it justice. Or maybe petty justice. Petty justice with a side of public humiliation and a garnish of social media warfare. You deserve better, I'd said. And I'd meant it. She absolutely deserved better than me. Better as in someone else entirely. Someone who wasn't me. Someone who could find her endearing instead of enraging. Someone who wouldn't spend the rest of the night lying awake in bed plotting her downfall while she snored peacefully next to him, probably dreaming about helicopter proposals and celebrity cameos. That night, after she'd finally exhausted herself talking about viral proposals and fallen asleep, I lay there staring at the ceiling, my phone clutched in my hand. She'd sent me approximately 17 Pinterest links before bed, each one titled something like Proposals That Broke the Internet, or When He Finally Got It Right the Second Time. I scrolled through them in the darkness, each swipe making me more certain of what I needed to do. If she wanted a spectacle, I'd give her a spectacle. If she wanted something unforgettable, something that would make headlines and trend on social media, something that people would talk about for months afterward, I'd deliver exactly that. Just maybe not in the way she was expecting. Around 3 a.m, I started making a list in my notes app. Not a list of romantic venues or professional proposal planners, but something entirely different. Something that would require careful planning, strategic execution, and a level of pettiness that would make the ancient Greeks who invented drama look like amateurs. Sierra shifted in her sleep, mumbling something incoherent about Instagram followers, and I felt absolutely nothing. Not love, not affection, not even residual attraction. Just cold, crystalline clarity about what needed to happen next. By dawn, I hadn't slept at all, but I had a plan. A beautiful, terrible, absolutely brilliant plan that would either make me a legend or get me killed. Possibly both. I saved the notes, cleared the Pinterest links from my notifications so I wouldn't have to look at them again, and waited for morning. When Sierra woke up a few hours later, stretching and yawning and immediately reaching for her phone to check whatever social media drama had unfolded overnight, I was already up, showered, and making coffee. I even made her some, exactly the way she liked it. Oat milk, 1 pump of vanilla syrup, the works. Morning, babe, she said, accepting the coffee with a sleepy smile. Did you look at those links I sent? I smiled back at her, the same smile I'd given at dinner when she'd stabbed my ego in front of her friends. Oh yeah, I said. I've got some ideas. This next proposal is going to be unforgettable. She squealed, actually squealed like a teenager meeting a boy band, and kissed my cheek. I'm so excited. When are you thinking? Soon. I told her, taking a sip of my coffee and savoring the bitter taste. Very soon. I just need to make a few calls first. She bounced off to take a shower, completely oblivious to the fact that she'd just signed her own social death warrant. And me? I picked up my phone and started dialing. The next morning, fueled by spite and approximately 4 cups of coffee that were doing absolutely nothing for my sleep deprivation, but everything for my commitment to chaos, I made 3 phone calls that would change the entire trajectory of my life. Well, technically 4 if you count the one to my therapist to cancel my appointment, because I was about to do something that would either cure me or give me enough material for the next 10 years of sessions. First call, Ray, my lawyer friend. And yes, before you ask, having a lawyer friend is one of those adult things you don't realize you need until you're planning to publicly humiliate your fiancé via billboard advertising and want to make sure you won't end up in actual prison for it. Ray answered on the 3rd ring, sounding groggy because apparently not everyone wakes up at the crack of dawn to plot elaborate revenge schemes. This better be good, he mumbled. I was dreaming about winning a case. I need to ask you some hypothetical questions about gifts and rings, I said, pacing around my living room while Sierra sang off-key in the shower, probably practicing for her imaginary viral proposal moment. There was a pause. Hypothetical. Very hypothetical. You're about to do something stupid, aren't you? That depends entirely on your definition of stupid, and also whether it's technically legal. Ray sighed the sigh of a man who'd been friends with me long enough to know that this conversation was going to cost him at least an hour of his morning and possibly his faith in humanity. Hit me with it. I laid out the situation. The $22,000 proposal, the public humiliation at dinner, Sierra's demand for a redo, and my growing suspicion that I'd accidentally gotten engaged to someone whose empathy levels rivaled those of a parking meter. Ray listened without interrupting, which is lawyer speak for, "Oh boy, this is even worse than I thought." So hypothetically, I said, reaching the actual point, if someone were to return an engagement ring, would it legally still be considered a gift, or could the giver reclaim it and, say, donate it somewhere? Hypothetically, Ray said, and I could hear him switching into lawyer mode. In most states, an engagement ring is considered a conditional gift. If the engagement ends, the ring typically goes back to the person who proposed. If she's the one who broke it off, or if you mutually agree to end it, you'd have grounds to take the ring back. And if I wanted to, hypothetically, make it very public that I was taking said ring back. As long as you're not lying or deliberately damaging her reputation with false information, you're generally in the clear. Truth is an absolute defense against defamation. He paused. What exactly are you planning? Nothing that will require your services, I said, which was probably a lie but sounded reassuring. Thanks, man. I owe you one. You owe me several. But who's counting? Ray said. And hey, don't do anything I wouldn't do. Ray, you once sued a guy for looking at you wrong in a Starbucks. He was looking at me very wrong. There's precedent. I hung up and immediately dialed number 2. Leo, my jeweler. Leo's one of those guys who treats diamonds like they're his children and has strong opinions about clarity grades that border on religious fervor. He'd sold me the engagement ring, a family heirloom from my grandmother that he'd reset in a modern design because Sierra said vintage rings were kind of dusty vibes. My friend, Leo answered, because jewelers are always weirdly enthusiastic even at 8 in the morning. How is married life treating you? Wait, you're not married yet. How is engaged life? About that, I said. She wants me to return the ring. The line went so quiet I thought the call had dropped. Then, I'm sorry, what? She said the proposal wasn't good enough. She wants me to redo it. With a different ring. A bigger one, apparently. Leo made it sound like someone had just told him Santa wasn't real and also had personally burned down his workshop. That was your grandmother's diamond. I reset that stone myself. The clarity, the cut, that ring was perfect. I know, Leo. And she wants you to return it. Well, she wants me to upgrade. But yeah, essentially. I could practically hear Leo's blood pressure rising through the phone. The man took his work personally, which I respected, but was also currently using to my advantage. What are you going to do? He asked, his voice tight. I'm going to take your advice from when I first bought it, I said. You told me if she didn't appreciate it, she didn't deserve it. I did say that, Leo said slowly. What are you planning? Something your grandmother would approve of, I said. Something charitable. Can I bring the ring by later? Absolutely. And you know what? I'm not even charging you the restocking fee. This one's on the house. That woman is Meshuggah. 2 calls down, 1 to go. I saved Nina for last because her reaction would either greenlight my entire plan or convince me I'd officially lost my mind and should probably seek professional help instead of professional billboard space. Nina worked for Premier Outdoor Advertising, one of those companies that owns approximately 800 billboards scattered across the city like commercial confetti. I'd gotten her number through a work connection, and we'd chatted a few times at networking events where I'd learned 2 important things about her. She had access to prime billboard real estate, and she had a sense of humor darker than my coffee. Nina speaking. She answered, professional and crisp. Nina, it's Ethan. We met at the marketing conference last year. You told me if I ever needed billboard space for something interesting, I should call you. I remember, she said, and I could hear the curiosity creeping into her voice. Please tell me you're not selling used cars or advertising a strip club. Better, I said. I need 3 billboards along a specific route. Prime visibility, high traffic, weekend placement. 3 billboards? That's going to run you. Money's not an issue, I interrupted, which was absolutely a lie because I'd just dropped 22 grand on a failed proposal. But credit cards exist for a reason, and that reason is apparently public revenge. I need them this Sunday. Morning commute. Nina was quiet for a moment. What are you advertising? A breakup. Another pause. I'm listening. I laid out the whole story. The proposal, the dinner, Sierra's demand for a redo, and my plan to give her exactly what she wanted. Something viral, something unforgettable, something that would absolutely make headlines. Just not in the way she was hoping. By the time I finished, Nina was laughing so hard I thought she might need medical attention. You're either a genius or you're going to be single by Monday, she gasped between giggles. Both are fine, I said, and I meant it. Okay, Nina said, trying to compose herself. Send me the route you want, and let's talk about the messaging. We need to be careful about wording. Nothing outright cruel, nothing that could be considered harassment, but enough to make the point crystal clear. I'm thinking 3 billboards, escalating in intensity, I said, pulling up the notes I'd made at 3 in the morning. The first one sets the scene, the second one provides context, and the third one is the knockout punch, Nina finished. I like it. Send me your mock-ups and I'll get the design team on it. This is either the best or worst decision you've ever made, and honestly, I'm excited to find out which. We hammered out the details, locations, fonts, color schemes, the works. Nina suggested we add a 4th billboard, something I hadn't considered, and when she told me her idea, I nearly dropped my phone. That's brilliant, I said. That's absolutely brilliant. I know, Nina said, and I could hear her grinning. That's why they pay me the big bucks. Well, moderate bucks. Okay, slightly above minimum wage, but still. By the time I hung up, Sierra had emerged from the shower, wrapped in a towel, and scrolling through her phone. Who were you talking to? She asked absently. Just making some arrangements, I said, smiling at her with all the warmth of a snake eyeing a particularly plump mouse. For the proposal redo. Her face lit up like Times Square on New Year's Eve. Really? Oh my God, when? What are you planning? Can I get a hint? It's going to be big, I told her, which was technically true. Bigger than anything you've seen before. Very public. Very memorable. The kind of thing people will be talking about for months. She squealed and threw her arms around me, still damp from the shower, her towel threatening to abandon its post entirely. You're the best. I knew you'd come through. Should I get my hair done? What should I wear? Should I warn my friends to be ready? Definitely warn your friends, I said. And maybe your family too. You'll want everyone to see this. She bounced away to start planning her outfit for what she thought would be Proposal 2.0, the reckoning, while I pulled up the design mock-ups Nina had just sent me. Billboard number 1. Sierra thinks $22,000 isn't enough for love. Billboard number 2. Return the ring. Demanded a redo. Stay tuned for season 2 of The Proposal. Billboard number 3. Screenshots of her actual texts where she told her friends I was sweet but too basic, and that she deserved something viral. And Nina's brilliant addition, billboard number 4. Ethan is now single and accepting applications. No proposal required. Below it, in smaller text, Grandma's ring donated to Children's Hospital because real love helps, not humiliates. I stared at my phone, at these 4 digital rectangles that would soon be plastered across the city in 20-foot-tall glory, and felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Genuine, unfiltered joy. Sierra called from the bedroom, asking if she should get her nails done in white or champagne pink for the big day. Surprise me. I called back, saving the mock-ups and forwarding them to Nina with a simple message. Let's do this. Sunday couldn't come fast enough. The next few days were a masterclass in psychological torture. Mine, not hers, unfortunately. Sierra spent the time between Wednesday and Sunday in a state of euphoric anticipation that would have been adorable if it wasn't making me want to walk into traffic. She buzzed around the apartment like a hummingbird on espresso, planning her outfit, coordinating with her friends, and generally treating the upcoming Sunday like it was her personal Super Bowl, Met Gala, and coronation all rolled into one Instagram-perfect package. You're planning something, aren't you? She asked Thursday night, twirling a strand of hair around her finger in that way girls do in movies when they're trying to be cute and mysterious. We were sitting on the couch, some reality show playing in the background where people screamed at each other about things that definitely didn't matter, which felt like perfect thematic accompaniment to my current life situation. I looked up from my phone, where I'd been reviewing the final billboard proofs for approximately the 800th time, making sure every word was perfect, every screenshot crystal clear. Something unforgettable, I said, which was both completely true and deeply misleading, my favorite kind of statement. Her eyes went wide with excitement. I knew it. I can always tell when you're scheming. She leaned closer, trying to peek at my phone screen, but I tilted it away under the pretense of the glare bothering my eyes. Give me a hint. Just one tiny hint. It involves your commute to work, I said, which again, technically accurate while being wonderfully vague. She gasped like I'd just revealed the location of buried treasure. Are you doing something on my way to work? Oh my God. Are you going to surprise me during my drive? That's so romantic. Wait, should I leave earlier? Should I do my makeup differently? What if I'm not ready? Just take your normal route, I assured her, fighting back a smile that probably looked more manic than reassuring. Trust me, you won't miss it. Friday morning, she called her mom. I know this because I could hear her squealing from the bedroom while I made coffee and contemplated whether I was a genius or just someone who was going to need to change their identity and move to a different state by Monday. The conversation went exactly as you'd expect. Lots of, I know, right? And he's finally stepping up. And this time it's going to be perfect. Her mom, God bless her, seemed cautiously supportive in that way mothers are when they secretly think their daughter is being ridiculous but don't want to start World War III over brunch. I'd always liked Sierra's mom. She made excellent pot roast and had once told me very quietly at Thanksgiving that her daughter could be a bit much sometimes. I wondered how she'd react to the billboards. Probably better than Sierra would, honestly. By Friday afternoon, Sierra had told her friends, her co-workers, her nail technician, the barista at her favorite coffee shop, and probably several random strangers on the street. She posted a cryptic Instagram story, just a photo of a calendar with Sunday circled in heart emojis and the caption, "Something amazing is happening, ring sparkles," which got approximately 400 responses asking what was going on. She responded to exactly 0 of them, preferring to keep everyone in suspense like she was announcing a pregnancy or a movie sequel instead of what she thought would be her second engagement to the same guy. Her friend group chat was blowing up constantly. I know because she kept reading the messages out loud, completely oblivious to how each one made me want to throw myself off our apartment balcony. Brittany says she hopes you rented a helicopter this time, Sierra announced Friday night, scrolling through her phone while eating takeout Thai food. And Madison wants to know if you're going to propose somewhere Instagrammable because she wants to post about it. It'll be very visible, I said, stabbing my pad thai with probably more aggression than the noodles deserved. Maximum visibility, actually. Perfect, she said, missing the point entirely while doing that thing where she took a photo of her food from 17 different angles before actually eating it. Saturday was the worst. Not because anything particularly dramatic happened, but because Sierra spent the entire day in preparation mode like she was getting ready for the Oscars. She went to get her hair done, some complicated process involving highlights and lowlights, and something called glossing that apparently costs as much as a car payment. Then came the manicure, the pedicure, the eyebrow threading, the eyelash appointment, and approximately 4 hours at the mall looking for the perfect outfit for a proposal. She FaceTimed me from a dressing room, holding up 2 different dresses. The white one says, innocent and surprised, but the red one says, I knew this was coming and I look amazing. Which one? Red, I said, because why not? Let her look amazing when her world comes crashing down. At least the photos would be aesthetically pleasing. That's what I was thinking. She blew me a kiss through the screen. You're the best, babe. I can't wait for tomorrow. Me neither, I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my petty, vindictive soul. She came home around 6 with approximately 17 shopping bags and the energy of someone who'd just mainlined a case of Red Bull. For the next 3 hours, she tried on various combinations of outfits, asking my opinion on each one like I was a panel judge on America's Next Top Model instead of someone who was actively planning her social execution. What about this? She'd ask, spinning in a dress that probably cost more than the billboards. Great, I'd say. Or this. Also great. You're not even looking. They're all great, Sierra. You look beautiful in everything. Which was true. She was objectively attractive, which honestly made this whole situation more frustrating because it meant I couldn't even fall back on the well. At least I dodged a bullet, reasoning when the bullet was a 5'6" former homecoming queen with perfect teeth and the personality of a particularly demanding house cat. Saturday night, we ordered pizza and watched a movie, though I couldn't tell you what it was about because I spent the entire time mentally rehearsing tomorrow's timeline. Nina had sent me the installation schedule. The billboards would go up at 6 a.m., right in time for early morning traffic. Sierra typically left for work around 8:15, which meant she'd hit the first billboard around 8:25, the second around 8:35, and the third around 8:45 if traffic was normal. The fourth one, the grand finale, was positioned right near her office building. She'd see it when she pulled into the parking garage. Perfect. Chef's kiss. No notes. What are you thinking about? Sierra asked, cuddling up next to me on the couch, her head on my shoulder in a gesture of affection that might have meant something a week ago, but now just felt like dead weight. Tomorrow, I said honestly. Me too. She sighed contentedly. I've been thinking about what I'll say when you propose. Like, should I act surprised even though I know it's coming? Or should I just be genuine and excited? Be genuine, I suggested. Definitely be genuine. I want your real, unfiltered reaction. You're so sweet, she said, squeezing my arm. This is going to be perfect. I can feel it. I smiled in the darkness of the living room, the TV casting flickering shadows across the walls. Yeah, I agreed. It's definitely going to be something. Around 11, she finally went to bed, but not before spending another 45 minutes on her phone, presumably texting everyone she'd ever met about tomorrow's big event. I stayed up, sitting on the couch with my own phone, staring at the final confirmation email from Nina. All systems go, it read. Billboards will be live at 6 a.m. Godspeed, you magnificent bastard. I sent back a simple thumbs up emoji and allowed myself a moment of doubt. Was I really doing this? Was I actually going to publicly humiliate my fiancée via billboard advertising because she'd been tactless and materialistic about a proposal I'd spent $22,000 planning? Then I remembered her face at that dinner, the way she'd smiled while stabbing my ego in front of her friends. The way she'd laugh like it was all just a cute joke instead of a genuinely hurtful dismissal of something I'd put my whole heart into. The way she'd spent the last week treating me like a trained monkey who just needed to perform the right tricks to earn her approval. Yeah, I was really doing this. I set my alarm for 5:45 a.m., early enough to be awake when the billboards went live, late enough that Sierra wouldn't question why I was up so early on a Sunday. Then I went to bed, lying next to my soon-to-be ex-fiancée, listening to her peaceful breathing, and felt absolutely nothing except anticipation. Sunday morning was going to be legendary. The alarm went off at 5:45, and I silenced it quickly, not wanting to wake Sierra before her big moment. I slipped out of bed, grabbed my phone, and headed to the living room. At exactly 6:02 a.m., Nina sent a photo. All 4 billboards, lit up and glorious, towering over the city like monuments to my pettiness. They were beautiful, absolutely beautiful. I made coffee and waited. Sierra's alarm would go off at 7:30. She'd spend 45 minutes getting ready, obsessing over every detail. Then she'd leave, completely unaware that her entire life was about to become a meme. At 7:30, I heard her alarm, then the shower, then the hairdryer, then the endless shuffle of her going through her closet one more time, even though she'd planned this outfit yesterday. At 8:10, she emerged, looking absolutely stunning in the red dress, her hair and makeup flawless, her smile bright enough to power a small city. How do I look? She asked, doing a little spin. Like you're about to have the most memorable day of your life, I said. She beamed. I'll text you when it happens, okay? And then you have to act surprised when I tell you about it later. Oh, I don't think I'll need to act surprised, I said. Trust me. She kissed my cheek, grabbed her purse, and headed for the door. Right before she left, she turned back one more time. I love you, she said. I smiled. Have a great drive to work. The door closed behind her, and I checked my watch. 8:13 a.m. In exactly 12 minutes, Sierra's life was going to implode, and I was going to be here, drinking coffee and watching it all unfold via the traffic cameras Nina had so helpfully given me access to. Let the games begin. At exactly 8:05 a.m., my phone rang. Not a casual text, not a gentle buzz, a full volume, ringtone blaring, someone is either dying or furious phone call. Sierra's name flashed across the screen along with that photo of us from our third date. Back when I thought she was quirky and charming instead of materialistic and soul-crushing. I let it ring twice before answering, taking a leisurely sip of my coffee first, because timing is everything in comedy and apparently also in revenge. Hello, I said, going for innocent confusion, like I couldn't possibly imagine why she'd be calling me 12 minutes into her commute. Are you insane? Her voice came through so loud I had to pull the phone away from my ear. In the background, I could hear car horns, a lot of car horns, and what sounded like someone yelling something about traffic. I put her on speaker and settled back into the couch, getting comfortable for what I knew was going to be the greatest phone call of my entire life. Good morning to you too, sunshine, I said cheerfully. How's the drive going? Are you kidding me right now? She was hyperventilating between words, her voice reaching frequencies that probably had dogs howling 3 states over. The billboard. There's a billboard. With my name on it. Oh, I said, channeling every ounce of fake surprise I could muster. What does it say? Sierra thinks $22,000 isn't enough for love, she shrieked, and I could hear the capital letters in her voice. It's huge. It's on the highway. Everyone can see it. I took another sip of coffee, savoring both the dark roast and the darker satisfaction of a plan coming together. Huh, that's weird. Must be a different Sierra. IT has a photo of me. More car horns. Someone was definitely laying on their horn in a continuous blast that suggested they were either really angry about the traffic or really entertained by the billboard. Possibly both. From my Instagram. My actual Instagram photo. Oh, that's Sierra, I said, like I just figured out which Sierra we were talking about. Yeah, that's probably about you then. The sound she made wasn't quite a scream and wasn't quite a sob, but was definitely the noise of someone realizing they'd severely miscalculated a situation. Why would you? How could you? People are stopping. Cars are literally stopping to read it and take pictures. Well, it is pretty eye-catching, I agreed. Nina, that's the billboard designer. She really knows how to work with fonts and color contrast. Did you notice the way your name pops? That's called hierarchy in design. Really makes the message. I don't care about design hierarchy. You should, I said. Visual communication is actually super important in modern. Everyone from work drives this way. She was moving into the panic-crying phase, her words coming out in these weird hiccupy gasps. My boss drives this way. My clients drive this way. Oh my God. Oh my God. Everyone is going to see this. That's kind of the point of a billboard, I explained helpfully. Maximum visibility. You wanted something public and memorable, right? Something viral. There was a moment of silence. Not peaceful silence, but the kind of silence that happens right before a volcano erupts or a building collapses. Then, there's another one. Another what? Another billboard. Her voice cracked on the word billboard, like it was physically painful to say. Up ahead. I can see it from here. Oh no. Oh no, 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 no. I could hear her car accelerating, probably speeding to get to the second billboard because humans are fundamentally masochistic creatures who can't help but look at things that hurt them. It's the same instinct that makes people slow down to stare at car accidents or read the comments section on controversial Facebook posts. 30 seconds of heavy breathing and aggressive driving later. IT says return the ring. Demanded a redo. Stay tuned for Season 2 of The Proposal. Catchy, right? I said. I workshopped that one for a while. Wasn't sure about the Season 2 bid. Thought it might be too on the nose, but Nina convinced me it added that extra layer of. Are there more? She interrupted, her voice now fully in the realm of hysteria usually reserved for horror movie victims or people who've just seen their credit card bills after the holidays. How many billboards are there? Well, I said, pretending to think about it. I'd hate to spoil the surprise. Where's the fun in that? The noise she made could only be described as a primal howl of rage and despair. More car horns joined the symphony in the background, and I heard someone, a man, sounded middle-aged, yell, "Yeah, Sierra? How much is enough?" Followed by laughter. Random strangers were getting involved. This was going even better than planned. People are yelling at me. Sierra wailed. From their cars. Some guy just gave me a thumbs down. A thumbs down. While driving. That does seem unsafe, I noted. He should really keep both hands on the wheel. I hate you. That's fair, I acknowledged. But let's be honest, you kind of walked into this one. I'm turning around, she announced. I'm going home. We're going to talk about this. Can't, I said. I'm actually heading out. Meeting Ray for breakfast. You remember Ray, my lawyer friend? We're going to have a nice meal and discuss property rights and the legal definition of conditional gifts. Should be riveting. Your lawyer? The panic ratcheted up another notch. Why are you meeting with your lawyer? Oh, I said casually, just covering my bases, making sure everything I'm doing is perfectly legal. Which it is, by the way. Nina's company has an excellent legal team. They checked everything twice. Turns out truth is a really solid defense against defamation claims. She was crying now, full-on sobbing while trying to drive, which again, probably not safe. But I was past the point of caring about Sierra's well-being in any meaningful way. Please, she gasped between sobs. Please take them down. I'll do anything. I'll apologize. I'll tell everyone I was wrong. Just please. There's a third one, I interrupted. You're about to see it. Just thought I'd warn you so you don't crash your car. Safety first. No, she whimpered. No, oh my God. I didn't need to ask what billboard number 3 said. I'd memorized every word, every screenshot, every carefully chosen image that would perfectly capture Sierra's true feelings about our relationship. The screenshots of her texts to her friends, the ones where she called me sweet but too basic and said she deserved something viral and complained that my proposal was giving middle-class energy. The silence on her end lasted about 15 seconds, a lifetime in phone conversation terms. When she finally spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. You screenshotted my texts. I did, I confirmed. They really tell the story better than I ever could, don't you think? A picture's worth 1,000 words, but a screenshot of you calling me basic is worth at least 10,000. Those were private conversations. Between you and 12 of your closest friends. Yeah, that's pretty private. Almost as private as a 20-foot billboard on a major highway. I paused for effect. Oh, and there's a fourth one. Near your office. Just in case you were thinking about still going to work today. The sound that came through the phone wasn't even words anymore. Just raw, inarticulate anguish mixed with rage and probably the dawning realization that she'd have to either quit her job or move to a different city or possibly fake her own death and start a new life somewhere remote where billboards don't exist. Why? She finally managed. Why would you do this to me? I leaned back on the couch, watching the traffic camera footage Nina had given me access to. Sure enough, there was Sierra's car, pulled over on the shoulder, surrounded by slowing traffic as people drove by, taking photos, pointing, probably already posting to every social media platform known to humanity. Because you wanted something memorable, I said simply. You wanted something viral. You wanted something that would make people talk for months. You wanted a proposal that would show everyone how special you are. I paused, letting the words sink in. Congratulations, Sierra. You got exactly what you asked for. She was sobbing too hard to respond, which was fine because I wasn't really looking for a response anyway. This wasn't a conversation. It was a closing argument. Oh, and Sierra? I added, just before hanging up. Check billboard number 4. I think you'll find the ending particularly satisfying. Or not. Depends on your perspective, really. I ended the call and immediately blocked her number, knowing she'd either keep calling or start sending text messages that would range from apologetic to threatening to manipulative and back again. I'd seen this show before. I didn't need to watch the reruns. My phone immediately started buzzing with notifications, not from Sierra, but from everyone else. Ray sent a text. Dude, I'm looking at the billboard near my place. You're either going to be a legend or need witness protection. Leo the jeweler sent a photo of billboard number 1 with 3 flame emojis and the message, "That's my boy." Nina sent, "Traffic reports are going insane. We're trending on Twitter. You magnificent chaos agent." And then, because the universe has a sense of humor, my mom called. "Honey," she said when I answered, "why is your father sending me photos of billboards with your ex-girlfriend's name on them?" "It's a long story, Mom. I've got time," she said. "And also, I never liked her anyway. Your grandmother's ring deserved better." I smiled, looking out the window at the city where billboards were currently destroying Sierra's entire social existence, and felt something I hadn't felt in weeks, complete and total peace. "Yeah, Mom," I agreed. It really did. After hanging up on Sierra and experiencing the profound satisfaction of blocking her number, a feeling I imagine is similar to finally scratching an itch that's been bothering you for 3 months. I did what any reasonable person would do in my situation. I ordered more coffee, pulled up Twitter, and watched my life become a trending topic in real time. Hashtag Billboard breakup was already climbing the charts, sitting pretty at number 7 between some political scandal I didn't care about and a celebrity feud that would be forgotten by tomorrow. But my billboards? Those were eternal, or at least rented through the end of the month, which in internet terms might as well be eternal. The photos were everywhere, hundreds of them, taken from every possible angle by commuters who'd apparently decided that documenting Sierra's public humiliation was more important than getting to work on time. Some were artistic, carefully framed shots with the morning sun glinting off the billboard letters. Others were chaotic, blurry photos clearly taken while driving, which again, safety hazard, but I wasn't about to lecture people on responsible phone usage while I was actively ruining someone's life via outdoor advertising. My personal favorite was a video some guy had posted from his dashcam. You could see his car approaching billboard number 3, the one with the text screenshots, and hear him start laughing so hard, he had to pull over. "Bro," he kept saying between gasps. "Bro, this is insane." The video had 2.3 million views in under an hour. I was basically a producer now. Around 8:47 a.m., right on schedule according to Nina's timeline projections, Sierra would have reached billboard number 4. The grand finale. The piece de resistance. And another thing, of billboard revenge. I positioned this one strategically, right across from the parking garage entrance to her office building, impossible to miss, unavoidable even if she tried. Which she probably did try, honestly. If I were in her Louboutin heels, I'd have considered just driving past my office entirely, maybe heading for Mexico or Canada or anywhere that didn't have a functional internet connection. My phone buzzed. Not Sierra. I'd blocked her, and that barrier was holding strong like the emotional Great Wall of China. This was Nina. She just saw number 4, the text read. Security cameras caught her. She sat in her car for 10 minutes, then drove away. Pretty sure she was screaming the whole time, but the footage doesn't have audio. Did she read the whole thing? I texted back. Oh, she read it. She read it about 15 times based on how long she sat there. Then she took a photo. Then she screamed at her phone. Then she took another photo. Very dramatic. Should I send you the footage? Absolutely. The video came through 30 seconds later. Nina was right. It was incredibly dramatic. Sierra's car pulled up to the parking garage entrance, and I could see the exact moment she spotted billboard number 4. Her car stopped so abruptly that the guy behind her had to slam on his brakes, laying on his horn in a way that suggested he was having a really bad morning even before getting caught in the billboard breakup traffic. Billboard number 4 was beautiful. Nina and her design team had outdone themselves. Against a clean white background, in bold black letters that you could probably read from space. Ethan is now single and accepting applications. No proposal required. And below it, in slightly smaller but still very visible text, Grandma's ring donated to Children's Hospital, because real love helps, not humiliates. At the very bottom, in tasteful gray letters, was a QR code and the text, scan to donate to Children's Memorial Hospital in honor of love that actually matters. That last part had been Nina's idea. If you're going to torch a relationship, she'd said, might as well do some good while you're at it. The woman was a philosopher and an artist, truly. In the security footage, I watched Sierra just sit there, staring up at the billboard like it had personally insulted her grandmother and kicked her dog. Her mouth was moving, definitely screaming, like Nina said, and at one point she pounded on her steering wheel so hard I was worried she'd break something. The hand, the wheel, her entire sense of self-worth. Could have been any of them, really. Then came the photo-taking phase. She held up her phone, took a picture, looked at it, took another picture, looked at that one, took a third picture from a slightly different angle like she was trying to find the perspective that would somehow make the billboard say something different. It didn't. The billboard remained stubbornly committed to its message no matter what angle she photographed it from. Finally, after what the timestamp showed was actually 12 minutes, I'd been generous saying 10. She drove away. Not into the parking garage, just away, peeling out with enough force that she probably left tire marks, headed in the direction of anywhere that wasn't here. My phone exploded with texts. Not from Sierra, bless that block function, but from everyone else who'd ever known either of us. Ray, I'm at the hospital. The one you donated to. They're thrilled. Also, you're going to need my services after all because apparently Sierra is considering legal action. Me. Let her try? I've got screenshots at this point. Ray, that's what I told them. Also, the hospital wants to give you an award. An actual award. For creative philanthropy. Leo, just saw number 4. The QR code is genius. I scanned it and donated. In Sierra's name. Hope that's okay. Nina, we've had 17 companies contact us in the last hour asking about viral billboard campaigns. You've created a whole new marketing category. I'm putting you down as a reference. My college roommate who I hadn't talked to in 3 years. Dude, are you the billboard guy? Please tell me you're the billboard guy. My boss. We need to talk Monday. Not fired. Possibly promoted. Definitely need to talk. Even my dentist texted me. Saw the billboards. Absolutely brutal. Also, you're due for a cleaning. But the best message came from Sierra's mom. Yes, her actual mother, the pot roast lady who'd always been way too good for her daughter's nonsense. I saw the billboards on my drive to church. The text read, I want you to know that I'm not mad. I'm actually a little bit proud. She needed a reality check and you delivered it with a crane and professional lighting. Also, your grandmother's ring going to help sick children is exactly what she would have wanted. You're a good man. Sorry my daughter couldn't see that. I sat there staring at that text for a solid 5 minutes, feeling emotions I wasn't entirely prepared to process. Vindication, sure. Satisfaction, absolutely. But also something weirdly close to sadness. Not for Sierra, but for what I'd thought we had before I realized we had nothing at all. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, thinking maybe Sierra had borrowed someone's phone to continue screaming at me, but curiosity won out. Is this Ethan? A woman's voice, professional, slightly amused. Depends who's asking. This is Rebecca Chun from the Metro Morning Show. We'd love to have you on tomorrow to talk about the billboards. We're calling it the proposal that broke the internet. Interested? How much does it pay? She laughed. We don't typically pay guests, but I can promise you'll probably get more job offers than you know what to do with. And we'll make sure to plug the children's hospital donation. I thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. I'm in. By noon, the story had been picked up by every local news outlet and several national ones. Man rejects $22,000 proposal do-over, puts X on blast via billboard, read one headline. When keeping it real goes right. The billboard breakup that restored our faith in petty justice, said another. My personal favorite was from some clickbait site. This man's revenge on his materialistic fiancée will make you believe in karma again. Number 3 will shock you. The Children's Hospital released a statement thanking me for the donation and announcing that the ring, my grandmother's ring, the one Sierra said wasn't good enough, had been auctioned to a private collector for almost $30,000. All of which went directly to their new pediatric wing. They included a photo of the ring with a plaque that read, donated in memory of a grandmother who knew the real value of love. I may have cried a little, just a little. Totally normal emotional response to seeing your grandmother's legacy do actual good in the world instead of sitting on the finger of someone who thought love could be measured in Instagram likes. Around 2 p.m., my phone buzzed with a notification from Instagram. Sierra had posted. Against my better judgment and all common sense, I looked. It was a tearful video, her makeup running, filmed in her car with the kind of dramatic lighting that comes from crying while the sun's at the wrong angle. I want to address what's happening, she started, her voice doing that breathy crying thing. My ex-boyfriend has launched a vicious, emotionally abusive campaign against me using public billboards to humiliate and harass me. This is a form of domestic violence, and I want everyone to know that I will not be silenced. The comments were, not what she was hoping for. Girl, you literally told him to spend more money on a second proposal. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes trophy. Domestic violence is a serious issue, and this ain't it, sis. The billboards are sending me skull. How is telling the truth harassment? Make it make sense. Someone had even posted a screenshot of her Pinterest board. Yes, the one titled, Training Your Man for a Better Proposal, and asked if that wasn't also emotionally manipulative. The thread under that comment was longer than most novels. I closed Instagram and texted Nina. How long do the billboards stay up? You paid through the end of the month, she replied. But between you and me, we might keep them up longer. They're driving so much traffic that other advertisers want the spots next to yours. You're good for business. Capitalism is beautiful sometimes. Isn't it though? I spent the rest of Sunday fielding calls, declining interview requests from questionable sources, and watching my story spread across the internet like a particularly juicy virus. By evening, someone had made a TikTok dance about it. By Monday morning, there would be think pieces about modern relationships, toxic expectations, and whether billboard revenge was the new normal. But for now, in this moment, sitting in my apartment that was slowly becoming just mine again as I mentally cataloged which of Sierra's throw pillows I'd be donating to Goodwill, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Free. The billboards would come down eventually. The internet would move on to the next scandal. Sierra would probably relocate and reinvent herself somewhere far away. But I'd always have the screenshots, the news clips, and the memory of the day I turned $22,000 worth of heartbreak into the most satisfying public service announcement ever created. Worth every penny. By noon on Sunday, I wasn't just viral. I was pandemic-level viral. The kind of viral that makes you understand why they use disease terminology for internet fame, because this thing was spreading faster than common sense at a conspiracy theory convention. Hashtag Billboard breakup had shot to #1 trending worldwide, beating out a royal wedding announcement and some celebrity who'd apparently adopted a baby giraffe. Sorry, giraffe baby. My pettiness was simply more compelling than your long neck and adorable spots. Sierra's Instagram had exploded overnight. And I mean exploded in the way that sounds good until you realize it's actually a nuclear detonation of your entire social existence. She'd gone from a respectable 3,000 followers, mostly friends, co-workers, and random people who liked her aesthetic photos of coffee cups and sunset selfies, to over 60,000 by lunch. 60,000 people had decided that watching Sierra's public meltdown was worth a follow, like rubberneckers stopping at a car accident, except the car accident had great lighting and a really compelling narrative arc. The comments on her tearful domestic violence video were absolutely merciless. I'm talking scorched earth, no prisoners. The internet has spoken kind of merciless. For every supportive comment saying things like stay strong, queen, or men are trash, there were 50 more that basically amounted to girl, you asked for this with a side of extra entitlement. My favorite comment, which had somehow gotten 47,000 likes of its own. Imagine calling someone emotionally abusive for literally just telling the truth about what you said. The call is coming from inside the house, bestie. Someone had created a Reddit thread titled, AITA for putting my ex on billboards after she said my $22,000 proposal wasn't good enough. It had 89,000 upvotes and 12,000 comments debating the morality, legality, and pure entertainment value of my actions. The top comment, gilded 17 times, simply said, NTA. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. She wanted viral, she got viral. But here's where things got really interesting. And by interesting, I mean beautifully, catastrophically messy in a way that even I hadn't anticipated. Someone leaked Sierra's Pinterest board. Not just any Pinterest board, but the Pinterest board. The one she'd apparently been curating for months titled, Training Your Man for a Better Proposal. I'm not even kidding. That was the actual title. Training Your Man. Like I was a golden retriever who needed to learn to fetch engagement rings of appropriate carat weight. The board had everything. Photos of celebrity proposals with notes like, this is the minimum acceptable effort. Screenshots of ring prices with annotations about which jewelers were worth it and which were basically mall quality. There was even a full spreadsheet, an actual spreadsheet, ranking different proposal scenarios by Instagram potential, estimated cost, and wow factor. The spreadsheet had columns, multiple columns. Categories included location aesthetics, social media virality potential, ring visibility in photos, and, I cannot make this up, flexibility for outfit changes. My proposal, the one I'd spent $22,000 on, was listed in her spreadsheet. She'd given me a C-, a C-. Her notes section said, and I quote, too domestic, lacks celebrity elements, ring is vintage, which reads as cheap even though it's not. Overall, sweet but basic. Would need complete redo for social media announcement. The internet absolutely lost its mind. Someone turned the spreadsheet into a meme format. Within hours, people were creating their own versions, training your cat to love you more, training your boss for a better raise, training your parents to stop asking about grandkids. The format went so viral that even brands started using it. Wendy's Twitter posted one titled, training your taste buds for better fast food, and it got 500,000 likes. But it got worse for Sierra. Or better, depending on your perspective and how much you enjoy watching someone's entire personality get fact-checked by the collective consciousness of social media. Her friend Melanie, and I use that term loosely because this woman's loyalty was apparently held together with dollar store glue and spite, posted a video that started with, "Since Sierra wants to talk about emotional abuse, let's talk about the group chat." Oh, the group chat. The group chat. Melanie proceeded to leak screenshots from Sierra's friend group text thread spanning back 6 months. This wasn't just about me and the proposal. This was Sierra's entire personality on display. And let me tell you, it was not a good look. Messages about how she trained me to take her to nicer restaurants by claiming she had food allergies at places she deemed too casual. Complaints about how I bought her flowers from Trader Joe's instead of a real florist, and how she had to educate me on appropriate flower spending. A whole conversation about how she'd returned 3 birthday gifts from me because they weren't Instagrammable enough, with photos of said gifts that looked perfectly nice to any normal human but apparently failed some aesthetic test I wasn't aware existed. The worst one, the one that made even me wince a little, was her describing my grandmother's ring as giving Depression-era energy and saying she'd need to gently guide me toward understanding that vintage meant cheap, not sentimental. My grandmother, for the record, had been a badass who survived actual Depression-era poverty, worked as a nurse for 40 years, and saved for decades to buy herself that ring as a symbol of her independence. The ring was appraised at $18,000 and had been in my family for 70 years. But sure, Sierra, it was giving cheap energy. The internet found out about my grandmother's story because someone, probably Nina, honestly, had leaked it to a reporter. Suddenly, I wasn't just Billboard breakup guy. I was the grandson who honored his grandmother's legacy while his ex called it cheap. The narrative had shifted. Hard. A parenting blogger wrote an article titled, "Teaching Our Daughters About Entitlement: What We Can Learn from Sierra." A financial advisor made a TikTok breaking down how $22,000 spent on a single event was financially irresponsible, and how Sierra's expectations were setting up young women for disappointment and debt. Even a relationship therapist weighed in, using Sierra's leaked texts as examples of manipulative behavior disguised as preference communication. Sierra tried to do damage control. She really did. She posted another video, this one clearly filmed after she'd had time to calm down and possibly consult with someone who understood how the internet works. Different lighting, better makeup, more composed tone. "I want to apologize," she started, and I almost felt bad. Almost. I've done some reflecting, and I realized that my words and actions hurt someone I cared about. The Pinterest board and the spreadsheet were jokes between friends that were taken out of context. I never meant. The comments were already rolling in before she finished the sentence. The context is you, sis. Jokes between friends is code for "I got caught," not the influencer apology format skull. How do you take a spreadsheet rating your boyfriend's proposal out of context? Someone created a bingo card of her apology video, with squares for taken out of context. "I'm sorry you were hurt. I'm growing as a person. This has been a learning experience." And the free space in the middle that just said, "No actual accountability." People were posting their completed bingo cards within minutes. She'd hit every square. My phone had become less of a communication device and more of a constant stream of notifications that I'd mostly started ignoring. But one call got through because I'd forgotten to block the number. Sierra's company. Not Sierra herself, her actual employer. A marketing firm that specialized in authentic brand representation and had Sierra's face on their website under "Our Team." "Mr. Davis?" A man's voice, professional but strained. "This is Marcus Webb from Elevate Marketing. I'm calling about Sierra Chun. She doesn't work for me," I said. "You might want to try her directly." "We did. She's not answering." He sighed, the kind of sigh that comes from dealing with a situation that's somehow both hilarious and career-ending. "Look, I'll be direct. We're getting calls from clients. A lot of calls. About the billboards. And the spreadsheet. And the leaked messages where she talked about manipulating you into expensive dates. Sounds like a Sierra problem, not a me problem." "Normally I'd agree," Marcus said, "but one of our major clients is a children's charity. They're not thrilled that someone on our team called your grandmother's donated ring Depression-era energy, when that ring is now funding a pediatric wing. I hadn't considered this angle. The universe was really committed to making Sierra's life difficult in ways even I hadn't planned. We're going to have to let her go, Marcus continued. Effective immediately. I wanted to call you first because, honestly, I wanted to make sure you're not planning to sue us for, I don't even know, employing someone who creates spreadsheets rating human beings. I'm not suing anyone, I said. I got what I wanted, which was the truth out there and my grandmother's ring doing good in the world. Between you and me? Marcus said, his voice dropping. Good for you, man. She pitched to our clients the same way she treated you. Everything was about metrics and virality, nothing about actual human connection. We should have seen it coming. After he hung up, I sat there processing the fact that Sierra had just lost her job. Not because I'd reported her, not because I'd called her employer, but because her own personality and leaked messages had made her unemployable at a company that valued authenticity. Karma wasn't just real. Karma had a PhD in poetic justice and was working overtime. My phone buzzed. Ray, you seeing this? His text said, with a link to Twitter. I clicked it. Someone had created a fake dating profile for Sierra with the bio, looking for a man who understands that $22,000 is just the starting point. Must be comfortable being rated on a spreadsheet. Vintage rings need not apply. It had 3 million impressions. I texted back. The internet is terrifying. The internet is justice, Ray replied. Also, her lawyer called me. She's considering suing you for defamation. I laughed for 5 minutes straight and then hung up. I looked at my blocked calls list. 15 attempts from Sierra's number, plus 6 from numbers I didn't recognize that were probably her using friends' phones. My voicemail was full of messages I would never listen to. The billboards would stay up for 3 more weeks. The internet would probably move on to the next scandal by tomorrow, maybe the day after if we were lucky. But Sierra's name was now permanently attached to spreadsheets, entitlement, and the phrase Depression-era energy. And I was the guy who loved his grandmother enough to put his ex on blast. I could live with that. Monday morning brought 2 things. A threatening letter from Sierra's lawyer and the worst decision she'd made since asking me to redo a $22,000 proposal. The letter arrived via email at 6:47 a.m., probably time to ruin my breakfast. It was 5 pages of legal jargon that basically boiled down to "you're a big meanie, and we're going to sue you for emotional distress, defamation, and invasion of privacy." I forwarded it to Ray with the subject line, LOL. He called me 30 seconds later, laughing so hard I thought he might actually choke. This is the weakest legal threat I've seen since a guy tried to sue McDonald's for making him fat, he wheezed. Truth isn't defamation, sweetheart. I literally told her lawyer that exact phrase last week. So we're good. We're better than good. We're bulletproof. She posted half this stuff publicly on her own Instagram, and the rest came from her friends, not you. She's got nothing. Ray shot back a response that was basically the legal equivalent of, nice try, better luck next time, and I figured that was the end of it. I was wrong. At 2:37 p.m., while I was actually trying to do real work instead of refreshing my Twitter mentions every 5 seconds, my doorbell rang. Then it rang again. Then someone started pounding on the door like they were auditioning for a cop show. I checked the peephole and immediately regretted every decision that had led me to this moment. Sierra was standing outside my apartment with a full camera crew. Not like a phone camera, an actual professional setup with lights, a boom mic, and some guy wearing a backward cap holding what looked like a very expensive camera rig. "I know you're in there," she yelled, loud enough that my neighbors were definitely hearing this. "I'm filming this for YouTube, confronting my toxic ex. You can't hide from the truth." I pulled out my phone and hit record on my own camera, then opened the door exactly 6 inches, just enough to be polite, not enough for her to barge in. "You're trespassing," I said calmly, holding up my phone so she could see I was filming too. "Want to make it a collab?" Her face went through about 17 different emotions in 2 seconds, finally landing on rage mixed with confusion. "You don't get to. I'm exposing you. Everyone needs to see what you really are. A guy who tells the truth?" I suggested. Novel content, really breaking new ground there. The cameraman, backward cap guy, was looking increasingly uncomfortable, his camera lowering slightly like he was reconsidering his life choices. "Lady," he muttered, "I'm not going to jail for your TikTok." "YouTube," Sierra corrected him shrilly. "It's for YouTube. It's going to get millions of views." So will the video of you trespassing and harassing me, I pointed out. Want to compare subscriber counts later? She opened her mouth to respond, probably with something about emotional abuse or gaslighting or whatever buzzword she'd learned from therapy TikTok, but then sirens cut through the air. Beautiful, perfectly timed police sirens, because apparently someone in my building had called the cops about the screaming woman with a film crew in the hallway. 2 officers arrived just in time to see Sierra trying to kick my door, which would have been intimidating except she was wearing those ridiculous stiletto heels that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. The heel snapped on impact with a sound like a gunshot, and she stumbled backward into the cameraman, who definitely caught the whole thing on film. "Ma'am," one of the officers said, already looking tired of this situation, "you need to leave the premises." "He's the one who should leave. He put me on billboards. He ruined my life." "Did he do anything illegal?" the officer asked. Sierra opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. He's emotionally abusive. That's not a crime, ma'am. Trespassing is, though. So is harassment. The cameraman was already packing up his equipment, mumbling something about how this wasn't worth the $200 she was probably paying him. Sierra stood there on one broken heel, mascara running, camera crew abandoning her, police asking for her ID, and me recording every second of it from my doorway. For the record, I said to my camera, making sure my voice was clear, I never contacted her. She came here, with a film crew, to my private residence. All on video. The officer nodded. "We'll need that footage, sir." I airdropped it to him on the spot, because I'm helpful like that. They escorted Sierra out of the building. She left one broken heel in the hallway like a really bitter Cinderella, and I closed my door, locked it, and immediately texted Ray. She just showed up at my apartment with a camera crew and tried to kick my door in. Cops were called. "I have video. Please tell me you're joking." Wish I was. Her heel broke. It was magnificent. I'm putting this in my Why I Became a Lawyer folder. This is gold. That evening, someone posted the security camera footage from my building's hallway. All of it. The yelling, the failed door kicking, the broken heel, the police arrival, everything. It went viral immediately, because of course it did. The top comment: "Karma has style sometimes." Yeah, it really does. Just when I thought things couldn't get more entertaining, Melanie. Sierra's ex-friend and apparently the queen of scorched earth betrayal, dropped a nuclear bomb that made everything before it look like a firecracker. She leaked the spreadsheet. Not the Pinterest one about proposals. The other one. The one Sierra had apparently been maintaining for 2 years, ranking all her friends' boyfriends, fiancés, and husbands like they were contestants on some demented reality show. This thing had columns. So many columns. Ring cost, proposal location aesthetics, social media engagement on announcement post, husband material score, and my personal favorite, overall relationship grade. She'd given herself an A+ for our relationship. Me? I got a C-. Her notes in my row: too domestic. Needs improvement. Ring situation: vintage, concerning. Financial potential: adequate but not impressive. Adequate but not impressive. I'd spent $22,000 trying to impress this woman and got rated adequate. Her company, which had already demoted her after the billboard incident, saw the spreadsheet. Apparently, rating human beings like their Yelp reviews for restaurants isn't great for a marketing firm's image. They fired her. Actually fired her this time. Not demoted. Full termination, effective immediately. The billboard company released a statement confirming all posted information was factually verified and approved by legal counsel. Translation: Sierra got fact-checked by Karma, a legal team, and the entire internet simultaneously. She deleted all her social media accounts by Wednesday. A month later, the billboards finally came down. I got a thank you card in the mail. Not from Sierra, obviously, but from her parents. "You gave her the lesson we couldn't," it read in her mother's handwriting. "Therapy starts next week. Thank you for having the courage we didn't." The Children's Hospital sent a photo of their brand new playroom, bright and cheerful, filled with toys and hope. A small plaque on the wall read, "In memory of Grandma, sponsored by the billboard guy." I cried. Sue me. Sierra, according to mutual acquaintances who couldn't resist updating me, had moved to another state to heal and start fresh. Probably somewhere without billboards. Wyoming, maybe. Do they have billboards in Wyoming? Doesn't matter. As for me, I got job offers from 3 different marketing firms who were apparently very impressed by my ability to turn personal crisis into viral brand awareness. Capitalism is weird, man. My dating profile now gets approximately 800 messages a day. Half are supportive, half are from people who want me to billboard blast their exes. I politely decline. Lightning doesn't strike twice, and honestly, I'm retired from the revenge business. When people ask about my engagement now, I just grin and say one word. Billboard. Worth every single penny.